Alright guys, we're back again with another video. Today, I'm just going to be going over some things about an INFJ. This video might be long, might be short, it might be multiple parts. I'm just going to cover everything INFJ from the perspective of an INFJ. And we're going to talk about some things. I'm actually going to have my display capture on, so hopefully nothing weird pops up while I'm going through these, and I might pull up some more tabs. Ignore my Crunchyroll tab. I was actually in the middle of watching something, and yeah. Anyway, so here's the thing with MBTI. I don't want this YouTube channel to be about MBTI. This is something I'm no longer involved in, but because I started talking about it recently and doing videos on it, it's kind of made me start thinking about it again. So I just want to clarify some things. And just kind of give my own insights. So first off, this video is going to include a lot of my own personal opinions and insights into MBTI and specifically INFJs in general. I'm going to go over some of my own past experiences and talk about some things like that. Try to simplify and give you guys some idea about what an INFJ is. So I only have 3 tabs open right now, but I'll probably open more as we go along and have to look stuff up just to try to clarify and remember things on my own. But so the first thing we're gonna talk about is I'm actually gonna use this chart, so I have this open, is what makes an INFJ an INFJ. So all the types have 4 primary functions and they have 4 shadow functions. The shadow functions aren't talked about as much. You're gonna have a harder time finding information on them, but there's information. Your shadow functions, well, it sounds negative. They're not really negative. They're kind of like support roles. I like to think of shadow functions as support functions for my primary functions. Without your shadow functions, you kind of everything would kind of it'll be a little out of control sometimes. Like without my extroverted intuition to balance out my introverted intuition, I can become very opinionated and very stubborn. So they kind of balance each other. In the INFJ, your dominant function, obviously for anybody who knows, is introverted intuition. We're the only type really that has that as our supreme dominant function, which is what makes us unique. Introverted intuition is a very interesting cognitive function. It's hard to explain. The best visual metaphor, which is the one everybody uses, is an iceberg. You see the tip of the iceberg, but then underneath, under the water that you can't see, there's this massive just mass there. And that's kind of how you have to think of introverted intuition. Is there's this little peak at the top that subconsciously we can activate, and then there's this huge mass underneath that we unconsciously go through. So introverted intuition is a lot of unconscious thinking and connecting the dots. It's hard to understand and control. Most INFJs will spend their entire life kind of trying to figure out how to make use of it. So I like this chart. It's kind of why I pulled this up. I also pulled it up because it talks about shadow functions pretty decently, in my opinion. But this chart is kind of what I wanted to use. So the best way to describe introverted intuition is what will be. It's kind of like almost like a future seeing kind of ability. This is why INFJs are commonly referred to as seers. From my own personal experience, sometimes you'll have deja vu. I've had deja vu moments. Introverted intuition plays very much in terms of like symbolism, metaphors. So like while a sensory type might look at like, okay, so I have money in front of me. So this $50 bill to a sensor is just a $50 bill. This is money, this is currency. That's all it is. But for me, if processing it through my intuition, I connect all the things that go along with money, with currency. That's why I have a very negative connotation against money, because I connect through my intuition and my other introverted functions and things like that. some negative aspects to money, how money is used to control people, money causes people to lose their minds and do things they might not normally want to do, and it brings out the evil in people who are greedy. So like I connect things like that basically, if that makes any sense to anybody. It's hard to explain these things, to be honest, especially the sensory types, which are the majority of people in the world, which is nothing wrong with that, by the way. One thing I want to explain to people about MBTI is don't ever be like ashamed or anything about the type you fall into. Just know this is not cut and dry. Like I said before in another video, this is kind of like the first step into discovering things. I honestly think for the most part you should always combine at least enneagram with MBTI. Enneagram's a little different. I think enneagram is more about behavior than it is about personality. I don't think. I think your behavior as a person is more formed through your own experiences and uh, environment more than anything. More than I think it shapes your environment, shapes a lot of your MBTI and your typing and your cognitive functions too. But I think inherently everybody's kind of born with a certain way their brain likes to function. So yeah. So then the next thing is your extroverted feeling. It's basically what people around you feel. It's not so much dealing with yourself. That's introverted feeling. Uh, so this can leave INFJs kind of not having their own set values as much as like an INFP would. INFPs are very much like they have their own set morality and values, and if you ask them about them, they will very much tell you. Uh, they just know. It's like it's always part of their being. Like I have these core values that I will never give up on. That's INFP in a nutshell. So if anybody's typing as an INFP, but you think you're an INFJ, if you really think about it and you have these like really core morality values and these things that drive your life, you're probably actually an INFP. INFPs tend to confuse themselves with INFJs a lot, and vice versa. Uh, an INFJ very much doesn't have a sense of self. It's a very core issue of an INFJ. You One of the biggest growth things for an INFJ is really discovering what you actually value as a person instead of what everybody around you values. Uh, there comes a point sometimes when an INFJ's life, especially my own life, where I felt very fake because when I actually try to think about what I actually value as important, uh, I have a hard time. This is especially true in like family situations. Obviously, I went through most of my life considering that I should value my family, but I also kind of felt that way mostly because society kind of deems that as something you should value, if that makes any sense. So my own self-importance of family was actually when I actually started thinking about it and went through some deep thought processes about it. It turns out that I actually don't value family and blood relations a whole lot, to be honest, which is why I don't talk to most of my family or associate with them or give too much shit about what they are doing for the most part, which might seem cold and cruel, which I guess by society's standpoint that is. But as it turns out, most of my feelings towards uh, family relationships and blood relations was mostly just due to what other people feel about it. And when I actually started figuring out how I feel about it, I really didn't have a feeling on it. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you understand what I'm trying to say, how extroverted feeling works for INFJs. It's very much taking in what people around you and what society feels about things more than yourself. Yourself is kind of taking out of it. This is why INFJs can be very selfless, very serving to people, and can feel very caring as people because they will usually do whatever is necessary to make you feel comfortable versus making themselves feel comfortable. Very much so, like giving you their chair, uh, getting up, they grab you food so you don't have to do it. Uh, Even to the point where some, so let's say it could even be something where they just don't talk. All right, you could be in a group setting and they could see that you're enjoying your conversation with this other friend that maybe they don't like as much, but they'll value how you feel about the situation and see how you're having fun with talking to your friend, and they won't even say anything. They'll just kind of leave you alone. It's a very weird function. It has a lot of different odds and ends to it. The next function is introverted thinking. This is pretty much dealing with why it is, as it says in the graph. That's why I have this graph up. I think it's really good. So introverted thinking is all about why is this a thing? Okay. It's very much processing internally, is connecting logic to things. Uh, this is why INFJs can kind of fall into this NITI loop, which is introverted intuition and introverted thinking. When you're not communicating with people and putting yourself into social situations, and you kind of start becoming a recluse, which is something INFJs tend to do a lot when they get overloaded, when they get sad, upset, they will tend to pull themselves back. Now, the problem with that is because you have pretty much the two most powerful introverted functions in pretty dominant places in your cognitive stack, this can lead into a constant what will be and why is it loop. So you will be constantly coming up with weird ideas of what could happen, what will be, just weird things you'll start thinking about, just like human evolution, future of humanity. Uh, some of the weird things I've come up with, it's just like, I mean, I've said it before, how like time is your enemy. I've done a lot of self-reflecting on the roles of humanity in the universe and my own role in it and things like that. And then you start processing, why is this, why is that? But the problem with that is introverted intuition is not designed to come up with conclusions, and introverted thinking on its own is not designed to come to conclusions either. Introverted thinking works towards conclusions to things and like forming logical based uh conclusions on subjects, but you need you need some form of sensing and feeling to go into that, whether that's your own feelings, other people's feelings, or or revisiting past experiences and connecting dots that way, or thinking about what's happening in the present. This is why, if as an INFJ, your extroverted functions are feeling and sensing, and if you're not using those to kind of help pull in information to confirm your conclusions with your introverted thinking, that obviously surface in your intuition and then go to your thinking. If you don't have those extroverted functions and you're not using them and you're not communicating with people and like and just and talking about these ideas in your head, you very much just kind of get in this constant loop of what will be and why is it. It's really hard to explain. You can do some more research on ITI loop. Just know that the deeper you get into it, the worse it gets. Like I said before, it can lead to depression. Generally, introverted intuition comes up with a lot of dark conclusions. This is a very natural thing for most intuitives to start doing, uh, without pulling in like your extroverted feeling about how people feel about what you're thinking about. You very much will just kind of naturally come to very neutral, gray, dark conclusions about things. Okay, so uh, this is one of the harder things to explain, to be honest. Hopefully, it makes sense, at least for the most part. I'm trying to think of examples. You can kind of use the family example, I guess, a little bit. It's like, without having extroverted, basically that's how I came to the conclusion of my own feelings on it, where I just don't put a whole lot of value into it. And this is mostly because I I came to this conclusion when I pulled myself away from society. So I stopped looking at around me how other people feel about family obligations and things like that. So then through that, I constantly was in a loop of, uh, family. I don't know how to explain it. We're moving on. I'm sorry. Anyway, hopefully it made some sense to you. And if you want to learn more about the NITI loop and that whole fucking debacle, just research it on your own. My best advice to you, if you are falling into that, is you just need to get out and socialize with people, or at least get into some kind of voice communication. Uh, if you're a gamer, get into like a guild or clan, start talking to people, just playing games. Uh, you'll just naturally start kind of getting out of the loop. It's basically just what happens when you pull yourself away from people a little too much. INFJs are very much social creatures, as humans are in general, but INFJs in particular are very social. A lot of your information, a lot of your thought process involves what other people feel more than yourself. So it's very hard for INFJs to spend too much time on their own and process things on their own, because you really need that input from other people around you. Because like I said, you're one of your strongest functions is what humanity feels, extroverted feeling. So very much what makes you who you are is about how other people feel about things you're thinking, about things you're doing, and who you are. All right, you don't want to think, you don't want to do introverted feeling as much. Like if you spend too much time on your own and you start really thinking about what you value as important, it kind of makes you kind of depressed, because you'll start realizing that you don't really know what you value, and then you start contemplating, what is the meaning of my existence, and it gets into an endless loop of that, of negativity, and this is what can lead to INFJ depression, and why INFJs are very likely to fall into depression, just because of how our cognitive functions work and our stack works. It very much, you're introverted, very very introverted, but you're an introvert that requires extroversion. Like you need to have social, uh you need to socialize. Like you need to, it's required for you to process things properly, because of how your brain works. So it's very contradictory, it's very confusing, uh it's very annoying. I know for a lot of you INFJs, you're probably like, I really don't want to go to this party, I don't want to do these things. But a lot of the times, deep down too, like when you actually just motivate yourself just to do it, you go to a party, a work party, a friend's party, a friend's house, you actually end up enjoying yourself. That's mostly because deep down you really want to be around people, even though you might not think you want to be. And a lot of that happens to do with your NITI loop. Is like a lot of INFJs will start thinking about humanity and how people are, and then when you do become very negative, you start using your introverted sensing, and your introverted sensing is your weakest function, and your introverted sensing focuses on the past, and you'll start putting a lot of negative connotations with past experiences with people, and then that kind of makes you start not wanting to talk to people as much, because you start processing this weird NITI loop of, well, if I talk to this person, this could happen again, and why is this? Well, it's because I don't have any values that are important to me, because I'm a piece of shit. You basically start ending up in these really negative loops. So try to avoid that. Uh, so the other function is your extroverted sensing, which is basically the here and now. Uh, this is your biggest growth function, in my opinion. If you really want to be happy as an INFJ personality type, extroverted sensing is extremely important. Um, Extroverted sensing very much deals with the here and now, what's concrete, what's in front of you. It's it, it's super important. I'm actually going to just pull up something on extroverted sensing. Did I already pull that up? No, I didn't. So introverted sensing is one of your 8 cognitive functions. How you experience it, how useful is bending, blah blah blah. Let me get to the point. Uh, those who prefer extroverted sensing, you live in the present moment. You don't dwell on the past. You don't daydream about the future. It's pretty much about the here and now. It's about your 5 senses. Uh, Reflexes, moving gracefully. It's pretty much like a driving function. It pretty much is what allows you to engage the world around you actively. Uh, this is why I said, even though an INFJ is primarily an introvert, you're very much extroverted. You have two of the most extroverted, like powerful extroverted functions in your cognitive stack with the two most introverted ones. It's a really hard way of life. Let's just put it that way. As much as you want to be alone, you want to process and think about things, you also need to kind of just dive into social situations and just put yourself out there a lot. Otherwise, you're just not going to pull in the correct information you need to come to real conclusions about things. Uh, Extrovert sensing is one of your weakest functions in your primary stack, but in my opinion, it leads to the most growth if you nurture it properly. Uh, as much as let's just put it this way, if you want to be kind of like a badass in real life, extroverted sensing is pretty great for you as an INFJ. Most INFJs that I've talked to anyway usually have kind of grandeur feelings on being superheroes, things like that, protecting people. That's why I'm under the category of people that agrees that most protagonists and most shonen animes are NFs, and a lot of them happen to be INFJs in particular. This gets argued a lot with a lot of people because a lot of people don't like typing INFJ in general because it's a very hard type to type. But most think shonen anime main character, right? Uh, just they usually have. How do I want to explain this? Uh, the best character I can use as an example of this is from, let's just say, Code Geass. Uh, what's his name? I don't remember his name. It's been a while. Suzaku? Yeah, Suzaku, Code Geass. Okay. So that character, uh, you might not think he's an INFJ, but he's 100% an INFJ. Why? He has a very dominant introverted intuition. He's always thinking about what will be. He pulls up conclusions about things and people very spontaneously on the spot without being able to kind of explain it himself. He gets these weird feelings a lot. Uh, the character himself is very introverted. You can see this throughout the show. There's a lot of times where he kind of keeps things to himself. Uh, but at the same time, he's also very extroverted. He knows how to appease people around him, make other people feel happy. But one of the key aspects of him and Lelouch's relationship is Lelouch recognizes him as being like really fake and not having his own values. Suzaku as a person in the show very much values what other people find important. Uh, this is kind of like his growth throughout the show. In the beginning of the first season when he's against Lelouch, to the second season when he's on his side. It's very much about how Suzaku has to come to terms of what he values as important versus him following what everybody else tells him is right. This is very much extroverted feeling in action, which is why you could argue he's an ENFJ too, but I definitely feel he's a much more of an introvert, and he's definitely using more of his introverted intuition. Uh, Now, why I'm saying extroverted sensing is kind of like your badass function is because in Code Geass, Suzaku as an INFJ has a very developed extroverted sensing function, which comes from his military training. Uh, so basically, if you can harness your extroverted sensing function, the best way to do that for INFJ is probably through some kind of martial art, physical activity. Uh, it's probably wrong to say this, but in my honest opinion, as an INFJ, even though you're very introverted and you seem more of like a thinking, heavy feeling type, you very much can pick up on sports and any kind of like physical activity very quickly. Uh, while I don't do those things a lot, when I do, I learn them very fast, and I usually end up being very good at them. Uh, it's kind of like the benefit of extroverted sensing is that you're very in tuned with your five senses and your physical sensations. This is the case with Suzaku in Code Geass. He's very physically adept. He's very combat adept. This comes from the combination of his just natural ability to hone his senses on top of just his intuition, being able to read people, uh, multiple people at the same time. This is what allows him to, you know, be stronger than a lot of other characters. He very much can predict what they're doing, how they're gonna act, and then use his ability to be so in tune with his own senses to kind of overcome them. This is why INFJs actually do make very good martial art practitioners. I myself do kenjutsu. I would consider myself pretty decent. I pick it up pretty fast. Uh, all of these things kind of naturally lead into making a very good action shonen character. They're all traits that make a very dominant, likable action character. Superman can be considered an INFJ. Why? He's extremely strong, very obviously you have to take the fact out he's an alien and he has super strength, but just in general the way he fights, he has a very natural combat intuitive. He's very combat intuitive. Uh, anything that ever talks about combat intuition, things like that, those are pretty natural for INFJs. Uh, in my opinion, you'll find a lot of INFJs actually in the military. A lot of INFJs that I've met have actually been military people, mostly because uh, INFJs tend to always be looking for. INFJs are very attracted to organizations, especially organizations that kind of have like like an important role. So like the military, uh, in terms of like weeaboo shit. If we're gonna talk about anime again, INFJs will usually be attracted to any kind of anime that have like weird organizations that kind of fight evil, things like that. Uh, we're very attracted to things that give us meaning in our lives because our introverted feeling is very weak. So what we tend to value, we have a hard time figuring out. So that's why we kind of like to join organizations and and stuff like that that kind of give us value. If that makes any sense, hopefully that makes sense. Yeah. So you'll actually find a lot of INFJs in the military, and surprisingly, you'll find a lot of INFJs are pretty physically in tuned. Uh, as an INFJ, I can tell you running and exercise is very important for you. It'll just make you naturally feel better because extroverted sensing is very high up in your stack. Uh, you'll get a lot out of it. And so as an INFJ, if you want to stay healthy and keep your mind pretty fresh and clean, uh, just go out for a run once in a while. Just try to stay active. Pick up some kind of hobby. I highly suggest some kind of disciplined martial art, boxing. Uh, I'm not going to tell every INFJ to go join the military, but that could be something that benefits you long term as an INFJ. You'll avoid a lot of pointless things because you're almost always forced to use all of your functions in the military, and especially your extroverted sensing. And in my opinion, your extroverted sensing what leads to the most growth as an INFJ. This is probably the most neglected function we have because we're so caught up in thinking and what other people want. We don't we don't pay too much attention to ourselves in the current moment. We forget a lot about what's happening here and now. We don't rely on our senses as much as we should. We kind of become over reliant on our intuition and our thinking and taking other people's feelings. So this is why extroverted sensing is extremely important, especially to become a healthy functioning INFJ. Like I said, you want to be kind of a badass. You'd be surprised if you're an INFJ and you start working out and getting fit. You'd be surprised of how natural it feels and how quickly you can kind of figure out martial arts. I learned a lot of different martial arts. I learned them extremely quickly, just because of extroverted sensing and being super in tuned with, you know, things around me and my own senses. So take use of it, and you'll enjoy your life a little bit more. That's why, like I said, this is probably the biggest thing for growth. If you're an INFJ. Uh, I guess we can talk about shadow functions too. I mean, everybody has all the functions. Okay, so just be aware of that. It's just how they stack up uh in your cognitive stack that kind of determines your typing. You can develop functions. Like I can work on my introverted sensing. and improve that? Will it ever take over as a primary function? No, I don't think that's kind of how it works. I think you can just kind of bring these all up to like a certain level, whereas like they're not as detrimental as they could be. Uh, this is something that takes a lot of self awareness and practice. This is kind of what I used MBTI for, is figuring out how these work, and then trying to figure out ways I can improve them. That's why very much so if I do socionics tests or any kind of weird testing that kind of test the functions, a lot of the times I'll kind of be even across the board with like slight preferences to these ones. So, your shadow functions, which don't consider them negative. They can be negative, but they're not supposed to be. They're like support functions for your primary ones. Is your extroverted intuition, which deals with what could be. Uh, this is very much featured in your thinking types. So like these are the people that are always kind of pondering things. They never come to conclusions. It's very much kind of like throwing a net out. Like you just kind of throw a net out there and you just catch multiple different things. I'm trying to explain this in a metaphor, whereas this is kind of like fishing with one line. Okay, you just have kind of like this one line, and you throw it out there. It's very concrete, comes to a very simple single conclusion. This comes to multiple conclusions and just kind of catches multiple things and connects. They both connect things, right? So don't think that like, well, this means like this is more a broader perspective, which it kind of is. Extrovert intuition is very much about like the broader perspective on things and perspectives in general, and just taking in multiple perspectives. This is why they kind of balance each other, and this is why they're both at the top, because you kind of need extroverted intuition as a support function to balance this one out sometimes, so don't become so single-minded. INFJs can be very single-minded. As much as we pull in all this information, we usually come to one single conclusion about things, and then we kind of get stuck on that conclusion. So we have a hard time accepting new possibilities once we come to a conclusion. Whereas extroverted intuitives are constantly expanding their thought process. They don't ever come to they never come to a conclusion, whereas INFJs will. So this is about balancing this out of coming to a conclusion, but also being somewhat open to changing your conclusion if new information comes in that kind of invalidates what you came to a conclusion on. These kind of balance each other out. Obviously, in a negative connotation, you don't use this function a lot, so this could cause a lot of issues. I think they explain it down here. So basically, the way this works negatively is if somebody tries to challenge your NI insights, you might use your extrovert intuition in like a weird way to kind of confirm your own belief. Uh, Basically, it could lead you to kind of lash out at people who challenge your beliefs. Uh, Extrovert intuition and introverted intuition are very complicated, but just know, yeah, I don't know how to. I'm trying to think of how I can explain this properly. Uh, so it's like if I come to a conclusion on something, let's say, just for abstract example, I've come to the conclusion after processing all this with my introverted intuition that religion is inherently evil. But an extroverted intuitive will counter me by saying, well, you can argue that religion has all these benefits here and here and there, and this is what it does. Even though it's evil, it could also lead to this and that and this and that and that. So you can't really call it evil. It's kind of like a neutral gray zone. You have to think it. You have to look at it from multiple perspectives. This could save somebody's life here, but it can also ruin their life. Blah blah blah. That's how an extroverted intuitive type would think. Whereas I will connect all those things and just come to one simple conclusion, an overarching conclusion. And if you're in a very negative mindset, this could cause you to kind of snap, and you'll start using your extrovert intuition to kind of reconfirm your introverted intuition. So you'll kind of get snappy and angry. It's a really weird. You'll notice it a lot when you come across these types in the world who use this as their primary function, and you start talking to them. Uh, I think I've made multiple examples where extroverted intuitives will naturally start to piss me off. Uh, yeah, it just kind of happens. So another negative function or shadow function is introverted feeling. This is what you value as important. The reason this one's dangerous is because it's not something you practice either. It's not a very strong function for you. So when you actually start to process what's important to you and what you value, sometimes that can kind of lead you down a dark path where you start not seeing yourself valuing anything, which then kind of demotivates you, makes you depressed. You start to question yourself. You start to feel fake. These two really contradict each other, uh, because this one's very selfless and very much about what other people feel and what makes them happy, and this is very much about yourself. So once you start really looking at yourself as an INFJ, because of how this works, this one makes you feel guilty. It's a really weird counterbalance. Uh, so it's like, for example, I use the family thing. I don't value family that much, but other people do. And if I'm in a social situation and people are talking about their family and things like that, it makes me feel really awkward because it makes me feel guilty that I don't care as much as they do. So if like somebody's cousin dies or something, for me, especially if I don't know that person, if I really think about it and process it through my own introverted feeling, I don't actually give a shit. But this other person, even if they haven't talked to him, just because they value that so much, because maybe they're an introverted feeler, uh, I can't really understand it, and it makes me feel bad because I pull in their emotions on the situation, and I because of my extra feeling, I understand how they feel about it, but then it makes me feel hollow and weird on the inside because I don't value it, so it makes me feel uh like a piece of shit basically. So that's how those functions work. Uh, that should that then that's a pretty accurate description of how those functions work. They really counteract each other. It's very important to start to develop this, in my opinion. This is really hard for INFJs to really dive into. Don't get depressed about it. You shouldn't feel inferior. You shouldn't feel bad about yourself because things you find important aren't the same as what most general people do. Uh, yeah, INFJs have a hard time really looking at themselves and understanding themselves because all the functions that kind of have to deal with that are very much functions we don't use. So while a lot of other types are very aware of themselves, what they want in life, how they feel about things, when INFJs think they know those things, but in the reality is we really don't, because those aren't functions we use. We're always thinking about what other people want, how other people feel, how society in general feels, and we kind of adopt those things as our own. That's why I said INFJs are very attracted to organizations, especially organizations that have like a kind of like morality that kind of goes in line with the INFJs or societies in general. So that's why the military is very attractive to INFJs. Protecting civilians, dealing with terrorism, stuff like that. Any kind of organization that deals with that shit, because those are such big things in society, and what's always on people's minds, those become very important to the INFJ. Uh, so this can lead a lot of INFJs to feel very fake. Uh, Extroverted feelings are very much about putting on masks in a way. Metaphorically, you put on masks for people. Uh, this is why INFJs sometimes come to the conclusion that they have no meaning to their existence. It's really hard for INFJs to find meaning for their own existence. But you could argue that the meaning in your existence, is the fact that you can help people. Okay, so this is why INFJs tend to fall into roles in life that are about helping other people, and I think those roles are important because they kind of give you a meaning to your life. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if somebody doesn't have their own values and inherent goals, and you kind of use other people's goals and inherent values as your own. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, personally. and that's something INFJs have to struggle with throughout their life, is coming to that conclusion and realization. So this is why if you're an INFP or you're somebody who's on the fence and you're not sure what type you are, I'm sorry, I'm moving my mic, so it's probably like really obnoxious. Look at this. This is like the biggest thing right here. This is how you really determine, at least for the most part, if you're an INFJ or like an INFP. So INFPs are very much about their own core values and what's important to them, and you know what's important to you. Okay, so if your family is important to you as an INFP, you're gonna know it, and you'll very openly tell people that. So if you ever kind of feel like you don't really have any values as a person, and you care mostly about what other people think, then you're probably an INFJ. This is why INFJs get labeled as being hypersensitive, uh, which isn't really the case. If anything, INFJs aren't hypersensitive in the sense of like we're like very emotional. I actually think we're pretty hollow people, to be honest with you. We kind of fill our voids up with the feelings of other people. It's kind of weird. It's a weird way of life. Yeah. You very much don't have your own purpose. Your purpose is kind of what other people make your purpose. So, yeah, good luck dealing with that. Okay, so the next one is extroverted thinking, which is our second to last worst function, which is how to do it. This is why, even though INFJs will come to very abstract, concrete conclusions about things and kind of connect everything in the one greater picture, we never really know how to do anything about it. Yeah, that's basically it. Like, I'm not gonna say INFJs are lazy, because we're not, especially if you develop your extroverted sensing. INFJs can tend to be very active, but uh, we have a lot of very grandiose ideas and ideals and like premonitions, but we don't know how to implement them. This is because our introverted thinking is very weak. We're not good at planning things, setting things up. This is can lead to issues a lot in like workplace scenarios, because uh, for an INFJ, extroverted thinking can kind of make you feel like you're being used, even though extroverted thinkers, like if they plan something around you and like they're not doing it to use you, they're doing it because this is in their mind the best way to have you do something and how to get something done. uh I think INFJ struggle a lot with dealing with extroverted thinking and how to do things. I think it's important as an INFJ to get a very strong extroverted thinking type as into your core friendship. Somebody you're really close to and feel comfortable with sharing a lot of your introverted, intuitive ideals and ideas, and sharing these things with them, because they're the type that's really going to push you into figuring out how to deal with these things. Let me look real quick. Uh, is this one? Okay, yeah. This is why a good partnership for an INFJ is actually an INTJ. I'm not talking about in terms of relationships, like romantical. I'm talking about like friendships. The best example of an INTJ INFJ relationship, getting into anime terms again, is Code Geass with Lelouch and Suzaku. Uh, Suzaku has a lot of uh, intuitive ideas and ideals in his head, but he kind of gets too caught up in making other people happy and following other people's orders and doing what other people want him to do, and he doesn't know how to really uh, act on the things he thinks about and comes up with. And this is what he kind of struggles with throughout most of the show. And it's through his involvement with Lelouch, who's an INTJ, who's very good. INTJs are very good at implementing things, getting things done, coming up with ways to apply their ideals into the real world. This is what extroverted thinking does. This is why INTJs are called the mastermind. They come up with the same intuitive, weird future, almost like foreseeing the future as INFJs do. But the main difference here is INFJs very much struggle with being able to actually do these things and acting on them, while INTJs can. This is very much why, if you can find an INTJ as a close friend, as an INFJ, it'll help you a lot. Because you guys are going to kind of be thinking about things in the same way and having the same kind of profound insights on things. And they're going to be able to help you really get those things pushed forward and realized. And the way the balance comes in is through the feeling, right? INTJs, the main drawback of INTJs, INTJs can be looked at as kind of evil masterminds sometimes. And this is because they're more concerned with their own feelings more than the feelings of others. So where this relationship becomes balanced is in the fact that INFJs can help INTJs understand how other people will feel about these things. So it doesn't really, their introverted thinking doesn't push their plans a little too far. This is the case in Kogeos. Obviously, Lelouch has very negative ways of doing things, especially how Suzaku feels about things. The way like Lelouch will kill people if he finds it necessary in order to make his ideals reality, whereas Suzaku is very much against that, and they end up balancing each other out by the end of the show, and that's kind of how it works. They both end up realizing they both kind of have the same intuitive dream and ideal in their head. Lelouch is very much the cog in the wheel that pushes the ideal forward, and Suzaku as an INFJ is very much the counterbalance that, you know, helps make everybody else kind of helps Lelouch understand how other people will feel about the situation, brings the humanity aspect into it. So this is a very strong relationship to have. If you find a close friend who's an INTJ, it'll be very interesting for you. You basically share the same functions for the most part. Just the difference is you have introverted thinking and they have introverted feeling. You very much balance each other out. So try to look for that. That'll help you. So the worst function for an INFJ is introverted sensing. This has to deal, if anything, dealing the past experiences. Most introverted sensing types look at this in a positive aspect. It's kind of their strength. It's pretty much, I like to call it the strength of experience. People who are very veterans in things, very experienced in things, who have a strong introverted sensing, will use their experience to their benefit, whereas INFJs, because it's your weak function, will tend to use your past experiences in a bad way more than a positive way. Generally, because introverted sensing is so weak in INFJs, when you do kind of dig up the past and look back on it, you kind of only remember bits and pieces. I wouldn't say INFJs have a very good memory, especially when it comes to themselves. You might have a good memory when it comes to like actions and things other people do, especially negative ones. If it's negative, like if somebody did something to you in the past and they hurt you, you're 100% going to remember it as an INFJ. You will remember that almost instantly as soon as you look at them, and it will constantly come up and be reminded to you. But like when it comes to specifics, like for me, for example, I fucking can't remember anybody's birthdays. I barely remember my own birthday. My introverted sensing is really bad. People tell me their names, I'll even forget people's names. This happens, if you haven't noticed, even in anime. Even if I like a show, I still will tend to forget people's names sometimes. It is what it is. Unless it's actually funny because I remember a lot less like protagonist names than I do evil people. So if like there was like a really bad villain and that motherfucker was like killing everybody and he was like really fucked up, I'll remember him from the show more than I'll remember like the actual protagonist's name. It's really weird. Uh, for INFJs, introverted sensing is very negative. Uh, for like anytime we look back at the past, it's usually negative. We don't use it in a positive way. It's very very bad. It's our weakest trait, which is why INFJs are so future oriented. Because we very much don't want to look at the past. Because when we do, what we remember is usually pretty foggy and hazy, and in a weird way, it kind of becomes like a warped negative experience for us. Uh, I very much can remember a lot of negative things about my past, and it brings a lot of shame, but I can't remember any good things. Uh, yeah, where this can also show up in the workplace. Uh, this can lead INFJs kind of prone to like repeat similar mistakes, which also frustrates the fuck out of us when you kind of fall into a like for me personally in my life I've always felt like I've been in a constant loop of doing like the same thing. I'm not gonna get too much into it. I've talked to it about another person to it about before, and for me my whole life has pretty much been about escaping this weird sense of deja vu and this loop that I've been in like my entire life. I always feel like I repeat the same shit over and over again. This goes with work, relationships, and just things I do. Uh, Very much because my introverted sensing is probably my weakest function in general. Uh, Even though I might have done this in the past, instead of looking at that and understanding and learning from it, uh, I very much don't, and I just kind of fall into the same things over and over again. Uh, this is a very weak introverted sensing, and it's really funny, right? Because I used to be a very huge history buff. Like I used to love studying history because you understand the past, you can prevent the same things from occurring in the future. Uh, but at the same time, in my own everyday life, that was like my weakest thing. So in a weird way, it's almost like I was just so into history because that was like it's almost like I was into like my own weakest uh function. I don't know how to explain this. I'm connecting it in my head, but I don't know how to really explain it to you. Hopefully, it makes sense. It's kind of like one of those weird things. Uh, this might be true for a lot of types, to be honest. I mean, it's something I have to think about. I never really thought about it before until now. It just kind of popped in my head. It's kind of interesting that even though INFJ struggle the most with understanding and past experience, like understanding past experiences in a positive light and learning from them, that was something I was very much interested in and still interested in. Like I love history. Uh, Maybe not so much anymore, but definitely throughout high school and college, like that's what I studied in college. A lot of military history too. Uh, so that's actually pretty interesting. So yeah, that's your weakest function as an INFJ. How you improve that? I'm not gonna say don't think about the past, but try your best to remember the positive things more than the negative things. I think writing them down is pretty important. I think this is something other people have suggested to INFJs that not so much like keep a diary, but maybe uh, keep kind of notes of like positive things that happen, just so you can look back at them and read them. Because you might look back at a situation 5 years ago, like a relationship, and be like, well, all this negative shit happened, this happened, and it was really bad, and it made me feel like this. But if you wrote down the positive sides to everything, it can help you kind of balance it out better. When we look back, we very much look back at the negative aspect of things. And this is kind of true too, because even when I was involved in history, I was more involved and interested in the very negative aspects of history and human history, so I could look at those things and examine them and figure out how to prevent those things in the future. Uh, I was very obsessed with like World War One, World War Two, all the world wars, and looking at and connecting how these things came to be. This is why I have a very negative. I was actually super interested in the military, but because of my involvement in history and learning, and connecting historical events together and figuring out the grand picture of what caused a lot of these things, I came to the conclusion that a lot of the world wars and a lot of other wars that occurred and a lot of death was a lot of the government's fault. So I eventually couldn't really stand to associate myself with them. So I abandoned the whole military career idea. That was also mostly my extroverted feeling too, pushing me to do that because my whole family were in the military. Like all my family members served, so it was almost like a oblig- uh, obligation for myself because it was almost I almost felt it was expected because of how everybody else felt about it. So, and this is where I finally started using my own introverted feeling to realize I didn't value that, and in a way, it came from my introverted sensing. Uh, so this is why I said they're kind of support functions, right? You know, if I didn't use this and to counter this and use this, I probably would have ended up joining the military when I was after high school. That definitely would have been a real thing. So that's why I said these are important support functions for these functions. They balance each other out, but at the same time, uh, it's very easy to fall into these, uh, like negative in a negative sense. If you're very stressed out, you could start ignoring your introvert intuition and start focusing on your extroverted intuition. And because these are your weaker functions, if you fall into these too much and don't stay to your core, it could feel really awkward, make you feel really weird and angry, and you don't know why. That's pretty much it. Uh, so yeah. Anyway, that's pretty much it for the functions. Introverted sensing is extremely important to remember. This is why, like I said, my best advice for this is to write things down, record things, positive things, not negative things, positive things. So you went out with some friends, you had a good time. You know, write it down, talk about it. Honestly, I would just say keep a fucking diary. I know it's really weird, but honestly, that's almost what it comes down to. Or just kind of train yourself to not think about the negative aspects of things too much. Try to remember the positive stuff. Uh, that's harder to do, but you can do that. It's something I've kind of trained myself to do over time. I try not to look at the all my past experiences as negative and shameful, as much as I try to look at them as positive or at least some kind of neutral sense. Uh, this is very much going to haunt you your entire life as an INFJ. Just things you've done in your past because of how you're very much people oriented. If you've ever hurt somebody or made somebody feel bad or feel like you didn't help them enough when you could have, this is very much why deaths of friends and family members can haunt INFJs for a very long time because you always look back at it in a negative connotation because you're introverted sensing and your ideal of what was is usually very weak and very bad, and you'll always pull up kind of like a hazy vague idea of what of the situations. uh Hopefully that makes sense. I know for me, for example, I had a friend who died who was, I guess you could say, was my girlfriend. We never were like officially dating, but we were pretty much together all the time. uh and she died, and I never found out how she died because I really didn't want to get into it. It was already traumatizing enough that she died. But she was almost in a way reaching out to me for help. But because we had some issues in the past of her kind of manipulating me, which was introverted sensing, and then, you know, combining introverted feeling, introverted sensing on the situation, instead of my primary functions, I relied on these functions to determine my actions when it came to her. uh this led me to kind of just ignore her pleas for help, uh which then become her dying, which then become me blaming myself constantly for it because of how I remember it. Instead of remembering anything positive about the situation and all the good things I've done for her and how much I did help her, I blame myself for her death, strictly speaking, because I used these two functions uh, to make a judgment about her. I, Hopefully it makes sense. I don't want to get too much more into it. Hopefully that makes sense to you and helps you understand it a little bit more. Why it's important to find like a good balance between these functions and not to overly rely on either one. Uh, that's it. Holy shit, this video is already an hour. Uh, how much more am I going to talk about here with INFJ? These functions are all important. Don't ever think that some people kind of get caught up as like these are the only functions that make you who you are. These functions too are very much who you are as a person. These are the negative. This is the negative aspect of your personality. I don't really like to say negative aspect because it makes it sound like they're bad, but they're not. These these four functions could be what are the primary functions in a different type of person. So it's like then you're almost like associating like if there's a type that has extroverted intuition, introverted feeling, extroverted thinking, introverted sensing, that makes it almost seem like well this type's really bad, uh, which isn't the case at all. Like that's not how it works. Like if a type has these functions, they're not negative. Uh, so that's why I guess it's better to call them shadow functions or support functions for your main ones. Uh, you can develop all these functions and improve on them, just like you can improve on these ones. Now, even though this is another thing I want to talk about too, about INFJs, even though these are your primary functions, right? And then like this one is your dominant one, your intuition is your dominant function. There are cases where your auxiliary function or even your other tertiary or your inferior function can actually become your dominant function almost in a way, right? Just through experiences, things that shape you of who you are throughout your life. Uh, I know the INFJ I know in real life who is a female. Uh, she definitely is an INFJ, but I would say her auxiliary function just through her experiences in life and things that have happened to her has almost become her dominant function. So it's almost like it overdevelops, right? So any one of these could kind of get overdeveloped, uh, depending on your environment and things that happen to you and just how your life unfolds. Uh, your introverted thinking could become a little bit stronger than most. This is why you got to understand that MBTI isn't like cut in stone. There are different kinds of INFJs. Not all INFJs are the same. There's some INFJs that really are very bubbly, feely people. Uh, they don't get mad. They uh, very warm people, very caring people. But there's also those INFJs that are very introverted. All right, these two functions will dominate these other two functions, no matter what, and not in an unhealthy way, right? Generally, NITI loop is considered unhealthy, but there are those INFJs who become philosophers, seers, people like that, where these two functions are just that dominant. It's not a negative thing for them, it's a positive thing, and these two functions just become like the dominant sides of their personality. Whereas there are INFJs where their extroverted feeling and their sensing could become more their dominant side of their personality. uh so yeah, in general I feel like either you're it's connected like this, okay? It's not going to be like your intuition and your sensing. uh Actually, no, now I think about it, I think that could happen too. uh there I think for me personally, uh, my introverted intuition and my extroverted sensing are very much my two most dominant traits in my cognitive stack. Uh, my introverted thinking drives me insane, so I use it, but I try not to as much anymore. I very much just through experience and just my life and how it's proceeded. I was so caught up in kind of like this loop right here, and then so caught up in this and how everybody else feels about me and making everybody else happy that I really ignored this one. So it's been in almost mostly so much in recent years that I've started to develop this extroverted sensing a lot more, and I usually focus on these two more than anything else. I'm very much like intuitively an intuitive sensor in a way now, more so than this. These are still healthy in me. I can still do them. They're still very much who I am and and everything. But I follow these two a lot more now. Uh, and this is just through, like I said, through experiences and just things that happen to you in your environment. Uh, if I end up doing a job where I have to like cater to people a lot, like this will probably end up taking over as these two will probably end up taking over as my dominant functions in the stack, more so than the other two. So that's why I said, depending, like I said, depending on environment, and situations and experience and just life experience, you'll meet very different INFJs. Like I said, the INFJ I know in real life, me and her are very similar. We have very similar train of thoughts and how we process things, but she very much displays her extroverted feeling way more than I do. Uh, and that's just because she's had a lot less negative experiences and fallen into a lot less introverted feeling and introverted sensing loops than I have. Uh, this is also why I ended our friendship, because she very much lacks this. This is something I went through because of traumatic experiences. I went through kind of an area where I had to kind of face these things and start trying to find meaning in my own life. This is very much something she hasn't gone through yet, and I didn't want to. I wanted her to discover it on her own. I didn't want to be an influence on what she finds as important, because that's how this works. If I'm involved and I try to figure it out with her, this is very much something that an INFJ has to figure out on their own. You can't have outside influences that do this, because this is so strong. You will adopt other people's values as important, and it almost subconsciously happens. So this is very much why I disconnected from her, so she could figure this out on her own, because this was kind of an unhealthily functioning for her. She was very much uh, kind of having way too much extroverted feeling. She wasn't using her support functions healthily to balance this out. She was very much catering to everybody else's needs and expectations of her without her realizing, and this is what was stressing her out and causing a lot of issues and mental instability. And so, yeah, so she needs to do some of this, basically. So, like I said, MBTI is, you could already see like how deep this gets. Just in MBTI itself, there's all kinds of deep, intricate things involved into it. And then when you start adding on other things like enneagram on top of this, it gets even more complicated. Uh, like I said, your environment very much shapes your behavior, and enneagram, I think, has a lot more to do with behavioral science than your own inherent like personality. I, for example, in a type 2 wing 3, but you could be an INFJ who's like a 4-3 or a 6, or it doesn't really matter. That's shaped by your experiences with things. People like to associate enneagram numbers with specific types, but it really doesn't apply. Uh, Also, one thing to remember is, in order to be properly typed, you can't be depressed. You can't have weird anxiety. This is why typing is so hard, especially on the internet. This is why I suggest, if you want to get typed properly, you need to join a group uh, of people who are knowledgeable about typing, with multiple different types involved in that group, and get typed that way, just through discussion, them asking you questions. These online tests are not accurate. They're very much binary tests. It's like, you check into like, would you rather go to a party or would you rather read a book? You click, I'd rather read a book. So then you get checked, okay, you're an introvert, which is not always accurate, because there are extroverted types that like to sit and read books. Like, so you got to understand the tests are not accurate at all. Uh, Especially if you're somebody who is depressed or in a negative mindset, your primary functions are probably going to be overshadowed by your shadow functions. Like when I get depressed, it very much becomes about loops of introverted sensing and weird introverted feeling, coupled with this weird loop I go into with my NITI. I very much will ignore this, and just kind of get stuck. Like, extroverted sensing, when you start ignoring this, that's when you stop eating properly, you stop like doing your hair, getting dressed every day, stop showering every day. This is something personally is a struggle for INFJs. You really need to work on this and take care of yourself. Uh, this is important. This is what gives INFJs a sense of uh, self care. If you have no self worth, your extroverted sensing is probably pretty low. You don't pay a lot of attention to yourself and what's happening to you in that current moment. uh, or other people too. So this is very important to work on. But like if I'm depressed, I'll be stuck in these kind of loops right here. I'll have a lot of introverted sensing going on, a lot of introverted feeling. This will lead me to test as an INFP if I'm depressed, or like an INTP, or something like that along those lines. Sometimes an INTJ, because I share almost all the same functions, but I could start using my extroverted thinking a lot more than my introverted thinking, just because I'm in a negative mindset and I'm not in a healthy state of mind. And so I'm relying on my shadow functions more than my primary functions. This can what lead you to test into multiple things. Uh, this is the case for most types. So this is why I said if you really want to get typed, get into a group, because they're going to ask you questions, and most people through conversation and communication are going to be able to tell whether or not like you're suffering from some kind of depression or mental anxiety or something that's making you kind of cater into the wrong direction. It's a very long process, but when you really go through it, it'll make sense. So this is why a lot of people kind of get mistyped as INFJ. INFJ is also a fad. That's like what I like to call it. It's a fad, because it's the rarest type and is kind of like almost mystical in a sense. People make it out to be kind of mystical. Uh, Everybody kind of wants to be this rare type, especially like introverted feeling types. You kind of like, uh, you kind of want to feel important, uh, things like that. Uh, INFPs, oh my, INFPs 100% like almost will always, uh, when INFPs start MBTI, I will say like at least probably like 80% of INFPs will instantly assume they're INFJs at first and then slowly realize they're INFPs. Uh, my younger brother's an INFP, and at first he thought he was an INFJ, then he realized he's actually an INFP. Uh, I don't know if that has anything to really to do with introverted feeling, kind of like making them more biased to wanting to be kind of like more special or something. You could probably look into that. It probably could be a thing, but a lot of INFPs tend to think they're INFJs, and then a lot of fake INFJs tend to think they're a lot of INFJs can sometimes think they're INFPs, uh, because introverted feeling and extroverted intuition are like the two. Extroverted intuition and introverted feeling are the two most likely functions to take over in a negative aspect. If you're like having some kind of mental breakdown or instability, or you're depressed, these are the two most likely to kind of surface. This is why very much so INFJs could type as INTJ one day and INFP the other day, uh, and an INTP, things like that. You can kind of type into those a lot, just because these two kind of start taking over. So if you type into, I would say if you're typing into INFJ, INTP, INFP, INTJ, more than likely you're some kind of intuitive. Uh, it's about figuring out the other things after that, and then figuring out your state of mind. Are you stressed? Are you feeling okay? Are you depressed? Because these things can all affect those tests very drastically. So don't ever rely on the tests solely to determine your type. Also, a lot of the tests are very biased too. I've seen, I've I found some tests that literally will always make you an INFJ. It's pretty hilarious. Uh, I'm not going to name the YouTuber in particular, but he advertises a site that he runs, and he likes to talk about INFJs a lot and advertise that he is an INFJ. And if you actually take his personality test that he advertises, you will like literally get INFJ like 90% of the time. It's actually pretty hilarious. Uh, I was like, really? So, and the reason why obviously they do this, why there's fakes, is because first off, everybody, a lot of types get curious about INFJ, especially introverted types, especially feeler types. They usually find some kind of interest in the INFJ. Uh, Even because the INFJ is part of both worlds, thinking and feeling. Every type kind of like likes to kind of associate with them a little bit, and gets interested in them. So it draws in a lot of attention, even though it's not the most common type, which is funny too, right? Because you would think, in terms of MBTI and information available on the internet, right? You would think the most common types, which are like the more sensory types, you think those who make up like 50, 40, like 30, 40% of the population, you think those types would be with the types that have the most content producers, the most information on the internet? But it's actually the opposite. It's the types that are rarer, like INFJ, INTP, INTJ, that actually make up the majority of information on the internet. And that's also mostly to do with just how those types communicate and interact with the world. These types are most likely to be the types that are online going through YouTube, whereas your sensory types are probably out in the real world actually accomplishing things with their lives. So it's kind of funny how it works out. Should just be aware of that. Uh, some other things we can talk about. This video is, like I said, this video it's going to be extremely long. I'm trying to cover as much as I can. INFJs get labeled as psychic a lot. This is because of our introverted intuition. Uh, it's very much a future-oriented function that deals with coming up with singular conclusions to things and connecting all the dots and discovering meaning behind things. So it's very much, as we're extroverted, it's very much like the analogy I used before, whereas extroverted feeling is like kind of casting out a net and kind of catching all these different things into that net and figuring it all out that way. And having all these different viewpoints and different like sections you go into. uh Extroverted feeling very much extroverted intuition very much doesn't come to a single conclusion. It comes to multiple conclusions and multiple perspectives and ideas, whereas intuitive introverted intuition is very much about coming, is you start off with a net and then you kind of reel it all in into one single string. It's about taking multiple ideas and connecting them all into one bigger meaning and picture. uh yes, that's pretty much it. Your intuition introverted intuitive types are very much about symbolism, metaphors, much less on the realistic side of things. So like if I look at, like it's like I used the example, I look at the money. I look at money and I'm a sensory type and I'm more of like a realist. You know, money is what it is. It's just money. But since I have an intuitive uh introverted intuition, cognitive function, I look at money and I think about everything connected and associated to money. You know, and I form a conclusion. My conclusion on money is that money is evil. It's the root of all evil. Okay, so something like that is something an introverted intuitive would say, is like money is the root of all evil. And if you ask them why, it's because they'll connect all these random things into the association of money that makes it evil, and how money causes people, to do evil things. Uh, blah 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 blah. That's pretty much how it works. Whereas like a realist type, or somebody who's just like a pure sensory type, would just be like, dude, it's just money. Seriously, like who cares? Like you need it. I need money to survive. Money is important. Blah blah blah. Sensory types will usually put a more uh, emphasis on money and the importance of it, while intuitive types will usually not as much. They're not in touch so much with, like, they don't care so much about like why is this like, I don't know how, I'm kind of like rambling now. Hopefully it makes sense to you, to be honest, what I just said, and it makes you understand the differences. uh so let's see, how do I know to get their intuitive hunches? What's he say? Well, she say, I think this is a female. Yeah. So basically, the way your intuition works as an INFJ, and this is why I said it's important to go out and socialize and connect with people, because if you do not connect with people, you can't pull in all the information you need properly to form a concrete, clear conclusion to your ideals. Okay? We very much, these are your information processing units. Okay? This helps you come to a conclusion, but our introverted thinking is not as strong as other types. Uh, there's going to be a lot of mistakes in the logic that you come up with. to make this into a reality and concrete conclusion. These are what are actually going to do that for you. You're very much, your conclusions are very much going to be about how these things benefit humanity or benefit people around you in the long term, or affect people in the long term and in the current state. Okay? That's how you arrive at your intuitive conclusions. It's about looking at patterns in society and people, and recognizing things like that, and that's how you come to your conclusions. Okay, it's not, this counteracts these two. This is very much logic and analytical based. These two are not. These are very much about how people feel, and things like that, and how it affects people. This doesn't really uh think about these two things. So if you are stuck in this loop right here, you very much will come to kind of very negative, flawed conclusions about things that might be true in a sense, but not in the scheme of things when it has to deal with interpersonal relationships and like current states. If that makes any sense to you, hopefully it does. These are very abstract things to talk about. Uh, so yes, please get out there, socialize with people, even if it's on the internet, man. Like, play an MMO, join a guild. Stupid as that sounds, get in the voice comms, talk to people. This is how you're gonna get these things going. Not so much this one. You're gonna get this a lot, because not to the same extent, because this is very much a hands-on function. This is, you pretty much kind of have to be in the general area of people for this to really work properly. Uh, but it still works in a sense. So at least try to do that. But I really suggest, hanging out with friends in real life. Find a type that kind of forces you to do those things. INFJs will always be like, well, I like to stay home, I don't like to go anywhere. But the reality is, at the end of the day, because of your extroverted feeling and your extroverted sensing, when you actually do get out there and do things, you'll actually like them a lot more than you think you would. This applies to me too. I used to like not want to go to amusement parks, not anything like that, because I just don't want to do that. I don't want to be around so many people. But then once you usually get out there, you usually have a really good time, because these two things will kick in, and because everybody else is having a good time, you'll have a good time, and you'll kind of feed off each other. Obviously, after that, you'll need to recharge, because these two functions will wear you out. Uh, it's just kind of how they work, and because they're not dominant functions, and not things you use all the time, whereas you're using this and this like all the time compared to these two, they can tire you out. So you do need to kind of go back and use these two and kind of get into this loop in a healthy way. You get into this loop in a healthy way by using these. Okay, so you go out for a whole day and you go to a park with all your friends, you guys discuss things, all these little adventures. You take in all that information, all these feelings, all this sensory information, and then during the night, when you're recharging, you'll process these things through these two. And that's how you do it healthily. You take in your world through these two, and then you process your world through these two. Okay? So we can kind of go over these a little bit. This is relationship stuff, also friendship stuff, that you're gonna have an issue with. INFJ, you're gonna get frustrated with people when people don't share your enthusiasm. This is because of your weak internal feelings, and your weak sense of your own values. When you do finally find something that you value and find important, uh, for INFJs, that's like a huge revelation in our lives. So if I find something like, let's just say, I think, for me, let's just say I think psychology and MBTI are super important. So when I first got into MBTI, for me, this was like a life-changing thing. I found something finally in my life that like I actually feel has value to me and is interesting, and like I want to talk about, not what other people want to talk about. So what was huge disappointment for me is that my friends weren't very interested in it. So even though I was super excited and it meant a lot to me when I did talk to them about it, uh, they weren't that interested, and I could really sense that, and I could tell they didn't really want to talk to me about it. And because of how INFJs work with your extroverted feeling, because you're picking up on those feelings from them, you don't want to bother them anymore. So you just kind of stop talking about it, which can make you kind of depressed a little bit, and kind of upset because you finally find something that has value to you, but it doesn't really have any value to anybody else. And this has to do with having a weak introverted feeling. Normally, for people who have strong introverted feeling, that won't bother them. It's like, well, I don't care if people don't uh, think it's interesting. I find it interesting, but because it's a weak function in the INFJ, this could lead you to feeling pretty down about it. It can make you feel really kind of bad and awkward. Well, like, why don't people like? Yeah. So that's pretty much it for that. INFJs can get stuck in relationships. This happens, friendships, relationships. This is why I'm using this as just like an example because they're kind of the same thing. You can get stuck in a really one-sided friendships and relationships, so please watch out for that. Uh, this is because of your extroverted feeling. That's why it's very important to kind of process things every night. I like to consider my life in kind of like this kind of cycle, like I said before, where I go out. I primarily use these things. I don't use these while I'm out with people, and then I'll take the information I collected throughout the day with these things, and then process them at night, like while I'm in bed or something, and just kind of unwinding. And then I'll process of how all these things ended up working out. And if you do that and you maintain that cycle, you'll very much be able to kind of identify when maybe the person that you're uh, in a friendship or relationship with, maybe they're not really who you think they are. Maybe things are really one-sided. Uh, what happens is you kind of get uh, way when you get into a relationship as an INFJ, this process in particular really starts taking over uh, your life. You start to kind of pick up on the needs of the person close to you who's important to you, and you start catering to them, and then they're almost there. What they value and what they find important starts kind of becoming what you find important, and this is generally a bad thing. Please be aware of this. This is not a good thing. It's a bad thing. You start investing too much of yourself into somebody else. It's almost in a way like you guys could be opposites, right? When you meet, and opposites attract. That's natural law. Opposites attract. You'll find that in MBTI too. A lot of your ideal relationships are going to be with types that have opposite functions of you, uh, or and balance each other out that way. Uh, if you meet like a sensory type and you start taking on her values as your own, this is very much going to throw you off as a person. It's going to make you feel really fake. It's going to make you come off as fake. They're going to start picking up on that slowly over time. It's slowly just going to ruin your relationship. It might work at first, but as an INFJ, you really need to start thinking about this. This is very important in relationships. You need to come up with your own introverted feeling, your own values. You need to set those in stone for the relationship. What do I value out of this relationship for me as a person? Because if you don't, and you start just relying on this to get you through the relationship, eventually you're going to start taking on values that don't make any sense to you, that intrinsically go against who you are. They're going to make you feel uncomfortable. You're going to start using your shadow functions, especially if you're dating an extroverted thinker or an introverted sensing type. You're going to start almost adopting their functions and their mindset for your own. Uh, it's a very much a chameleon effect that INFJs struggle with. It's through overabundance of extroverted feeling, uh, because we rely on it so heavily in our interpersonal relationships. When you really start to trust somebody and become close with them, this is why people. I remember people used to make fun of me a lot because I would kind of start adopting people's mannerisms that I would become close to, and it's not even through my own control. I don't do it consciously; it's subconscious. This kind of gets overloaded and starts flooding into this, and then like in a way, I slowly start to become that person. Just in the way I talk, the way I act, I will start kind of just taking on that person as myself. This comes from a very lack of self-importance, which goes into so it goes into extroverted thinking too. introverted. It goes into both your senses and your introverted feeling. It's from just a lack of establishing your own values as a person, and just you slowly absorbing other people's values, and you slowly start to lose track of who you actually are. Uh, and then this could lead to even more negative functions taking over. These functions will start taking over versus these ones, and you'll become very unbalanced, and it can just cause a lot of issues in your relationships. You could become self-destructive. You could start pushing people away because it starts freaking you out. One of the biggest reasons why you start pushing people away is because you start to question whether or not like you're actually the one in control of the relationship in a way. Like, are you really the one feeling these things, or is it this person who's making you feel these things because you're kind of just absorbing it through them? INFJs very much struggle with relationships and friendships. This is why we have very few, if any at all. Uh, Generally, even in just a friendship case, you very much will start to feel awkward with your friends because you'll feel fake a lot of the time. If you don't have your own intrinsic values that are concrete, that you've really thought about and processed, you'll start to almost feel fake around your friends, like, and you'll feel bad about it, to be honest with you. You'll feel like you're not really showing them who you really are, and then you'll start questioning, well, who really am I? And what is the meaning to me? Like, do I really value, like, you have a friend who's into vehicles and cars, and that's all you talk about when you're together. And then you'll start thinking, do I really actually care or give two shits about cars and all that stuff? Or am I just kind of like faking it because I'm with him and I'm using his values as my own? That's basically what ends up happening. So this is why I said it's a very important to kind of develop this as one of your biggest growth things. It kind of cements you into the concrete and things in front of you, uh, which can give you a sense of reality for yourself, which then can help you kind of process your own introverted feeling and what you value. These are very important to your growth as a person, as an INFJ, in my opinion, is establishing your own values and what you really find important, and kind of establishing like a realistic, concrete sense of self and your senses in the moment, and focusing more on things in front of you than trying to look into the convoluted bullshit. Your introverted intuition uh, and your extroverted feeling are gonna make you kind of feel about things. You're going to try to start finding meanings into actions that people have and words they say that's not really there because of these two functions. Especially if this one starts going out of control a little bit, you'll start kind of feeding into things very negatively and just making assumptions that aren't there, and it'll lead to a lot of negative outcomes in your relationships. uh, it also kind of blinds you to really negative relationships. You could you start seeing things in people that aren't there. You start assuming that they're better than they are. Maybe it starts off really great, and like it can even be the case of like some people just have their own way of dealing with their own struggles that are different than you. And even though like you can see deep down, and deep down, like this is actually like a really good person, and you can see, you start idealizing and picturing the future you have together, and you can see the good that can come out of it and the benefit you can have for each other, but that other person just can't see that. And that's not a bad thing. It's not their fault. It's because of how their functions work. They're not an intuitive type like you are, maybe, so they can't just picture the future like you can. They can't look past like all the current shit in front of them that's happening. They can't get past their past, which is if they're introverted sensing type, maybe this is like a negative function for them too, and they're kind of stuck in this loop with it. They look at their past really in a negative sense. Maybe they had a lot of like abusive relationships, and they're too scared to like let you in because of these. it, it's a really confusing, convoluted thing. It's relationships are really hard, especially for INFJs, because you see these things and you see the struggles that people are going through because of how your functions work, and you just intuitively will kind of understand these things even when other types don't. And as much as you want to help them and get involved and help them understand, it's not always possible. Sometimes it's not possible to really understand somebody without communication, and some people just don't want to communicate. uh Sometimes people are just stuck in negative loops and things that hurt them so much that no matter how nice you are about it, or how much your efforts towards them are positive, they can't accept it. So, and that makes it really hard for an INFJ, because they kind of will stay longer into negative environments and things than they should, because they can see deep down like the issue at hand, and the true issue and how they really feel, or like they have like a weird sense of the future that is possible. We're very much about possibilities in the future. uh we very much will ignore this a lot of what is happening right now, and be more focused on what will be. So like that's why I said, as a for an important sense of your growth as an INFJ is going to be this, realizing that sometimes this needs to be more important than this. As much as this might seem very positive and look really good to you, what's happening right now might not be. So then you need to start using these two to start figuring out, why is this happening right now? Because sometimes you can kind of get too hooked up on the possibilities of the future and what will be and why it will be, and processing, that, instead of processing this. You'll start to overlook the current issue, like, because sometimes in your relationship, the issue at hand could be really minor, but it could grow into something major because you continue to ignore it because you're stuck here and you're not focusing here. So just be aware of that. So obviously, also because you're an intuitive type and because your introverted sensing is very bad, when you start noticing patterns in a dating relationship or even a friendship that have similarities to something from your past that's negative to you, you will almost instantly start to kind of just fall out of it. So this happens for me a lot too. I'll kind of fall into friendships. They'll be working for like a day or two, feel really good, and then out of nowhere, I'll just disappear on that person, and they'll be really confused. This really happens for INFJs. If you do online dating, I'm gonna tell you right now, INFJs, don't do online dating. It's really, really bad. Just don't do it. Uh, Online dating in particular, if you meet an INFJ, especially if you're a female, if you meet an INFJ male, which, props to you if you actually find one. We're a fucking rarest thing in the world, apparently. Uh, don't be surprised if you're talking to them and for a day and everything's like really good, and you're like, wow, this guy's like really interesting and real. Don't be surprised if all of a sudden he just disappears out of nowhere. We will do that. Mostly because our introverted sensing is really bad. So if we had a lot of really traumatic relationships in the past, and you start soaring, even if you don't do it intentionally, maybe. And here's the thing: like, you could show a sign from our past relationships that isn't necessarily going to lead to the same outcome, but because our introverted sensing and our sense of the past and things like that is so bad, we will instantly just kind of associate it with something negative and just take off. So another thing is INFJs, you're always going to feel kind of lonely. Like I said, this goes back into, I'm not going to get too much into this one, but this goes back into what I said before about establishing your own values and what's important to you, and like your own feelings on things. Because if you don't do that, you're going to start feeling kind of like uh empty about your relationship. You're going to start asking yourself, like, do I really like this person, or do I like them because they like me? Do I like the things that we do because they like it or because I like it? You're just going to have a lot of issues. uh Especially if you're dating a sensory type, you're going to get really confused. This is why communication is important, and why establishing your own ideals, and sense of self are important for an INFJ. Especially if you're going to date a sensory type that's not going to be able to kind of read into what's going on with you. Uh, just be aware, if you do like form relationships with other INFJs, uh, they're going to pick up on these things. and that it always doesn't always end well either, as in the case with my INFJ relationship, as I explained to you earlier. Uh, INFJs are really weird when it comes to relationships and partnerships and friendships. We will do a lot of weird things that don't make any sense to other people, but make sense to us in our weird, fucking warped up sense of reality. Can we definitely let someone else in? So, because introverted sensing is really weak, and because introverted feeling is really weak, uh, we can have a hard time letting people into our lives in general because of past experiences. Uh, like I said, very much a cycle for most INFJs growing up is going to be dealing with extroverted feeling. It's a great tool, it's amazing, but the problem is because these are lesser importance, they're not something we think about, especially when you're younger. So eventually you're going to start feeling pretty empty and kind of fake and not really understanding what's important to you when you're younger, especially. You're going to deal with these. And this almost always leads to like your first relationships and your first friendships being really awkward and seemingly really silly. And they leave a lot of shameful feelings and regret because of this. So it's very hard to find an INFJ who doesn't go through this process. I think it's a natural process for an INFJ growing up. You're going to have really awkward misunderstandings and really awkward relationships, especially early on in your life with people, and it's just gonna happen. And my advice for you is uh don't let this demon be the reason why you don't form new ones. Always keep forming new ones. Always. Don't Obviously you should be guarded. Everybody in life should be guarded against new people that come into your life at first, but don't be too guarded. Eventually you need to drop those guards and let the walls down. I like to consider my mind a series of about 100 walls, and I let down walls like 1 through 40 uh naturally right away, where it used to be like I would drop one wall at a time. Now sometimes, as long as like the feeling's right, my natural intuitive feeling, almost right off the bat, if I feel everything's okay, I will drop walls 1 through 40 before, uh, right away. Just to get things flowing. Whereas before, I would drop like one wall at a time, and by the time we have a friendship that lasts 3 years, I might finally drop wall 60, and you might finally get to see a little bit of who I am. I actually still have friendships. I've been friends with some people for almost 10 years now. There's one friend in particular. We never talk about anything deep or anything like that, and I still have most of my walls up with him. So he doesn't really know shit about me. This also applies to my own family too. My own family doesn't even know like what I like to do, what I like to talk about, my own interests. I don't share any of that with them. So INFJs are very stubborn with this. So good luck. If you're a type that's looking to communicate and enjoy a relationship with an INFJ, please be patient and just understand how their thought process works. Just have a little bit of patience with them. Push them too. Don't be afraid to push them. Sometimes you just really need to push them. Just make them understand. Uh, they'll understand. All right, if you explain it to them properly, because of their extroverted feeling, they're gonna understand. Like if you're feeling to, uh, if you're feeling to understand them as genuine, they're gonna understand that. All right, sorry about that. Cut off the recording. I had somebody come talk to me for a second. So what I was saying is, through their extroverted feeling, they're really gonna know if your feelings are genuine or not. In the sense of, if you really want to get to know them. So if you do kind of push them a little bit and communicate to them properly, that like, hey, like I'm pushy because I really, really, really like you. I want to get to know you better. They're gonna pick up on it, so they'll understand, and they'll probably drop their walls for you, more than likely. Uh, I'm going to be disappointed. Yes, this is kind of true too. We are kind of idealistic. When we do form a relationship, I know for me, we can be a little too lovey-dovey and a little too involved, and we start picturing like I'll start picturing like our future, our marriage, everything. And, this can lead to a lot of disappointments. And this, like I said, comes from this having a very weak sense of happening in the now. This can lead to us not appreciating things in the moment. This is why I said in another video, when I was doing the character description, character analysis of Hachiman Hikigaya, who I feel is an INFJ, this is something he comes to terms with. This is about him kind of understanding his own extroverted sensing function and starting to use it more. He starts to realize the importance of the feeling he has about what's going on in front of him and his connection with the people in his current life. The problem with INFJs is you're so stuck on what's going to be and how to get there and all that stuff. You kind of tend to not appreciate what's happening in the now, and then because you overlook this throughout most of your life, by the way, you're going to do this a lot. You'll start to remembering, especially when you get sad, depressed, or something happens. This happens to me a lot. I'll start thinking about like past friendships or people I knew, and I'll start thinking about it. And because my introverted sensing is really, really bad, I'll start thinking of it very negatively, and I'll get like ashamed of myself and upset with myself for not like pursuing like what, like I start thinking about like what would have happened if if I appreciated that friendship more and I try to nurture that friendship more. uh you'll look back on a lot of feelings you've had in former relationships, and you don't necessarily look at it in a negative sense in a way, but like you'll feel really negative about it because you just kind of didn't really appreciate it for what it was when it was happening, because you were kind of too concerned about their feelings. And then like on this part right here, these three, you're too kind of stuck here and you weren't really here. Okay, so because you weren't here, when you finally get to here a year later, you start regretting. Regret is a huge part of INFJ. Lots of regrets, very much so, and that's because your sense of the past is very weak. It's very hard to process this in a positive manner for us. It's always going to be negative. You'll come up with a lot of negative emotions and feel really bad, and it'll just make you feel like shit. So just be careful with that. Try to this, please, 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 please appreciate everything happening in front of you in the moment as it is right then. Practice this. Get out of this. Okay, just use these two. Just get into these two. Focus on their needs. Focus on your needs, what you value, and then just enjoy the moment you're in, because a year from now that person might be gone. They could die, you could die, they could move away. If it's a friendship, like a coworker, they could move to another job, you can move to another job. Just appreciate it for what it is, and you'll build a more positive past. Write it down. You go out, you guys have a good time, write it down, make videos on it if you have to, video log, talk about, hey, I went out with my friends today, it was a lot of fun, we kind of opened up to each other more. This will make this a lot less scary, and it'll be a lot less of a demon for you if you can do those things. This right here, 100%. This is why I 100% suggest, if you're an INFJ, you shouldn't date by type anyway, by the way. If you're going to date people, just date people. Don't try to type them in your head. The more you try to like psychologically analyze people around you, the worse it kind of gets, because nobody kind of likes that. And this is something INFJs tend to do a little too much. You just kind of start to read into people and notice people's weird habits and tendencies, and then you kind of like start to have like really biased conversations, and you kind of start to manipulate those things a little bit subconsciously. So don't so much do that. I'm not suggesting you date based off MBTI. You really shouldn't do that at all. It's really stupid, but it could be used as something interesting between the two of you once you have a formed relationship. I did have like one friend that did take the MBTI, and we actually had a lot of really interesting conversations talking about it. But we already had an established friendship from the past. This is not something that made us form friendship. It's just something we brought up, and from our mutual interest in the thing, and just from seeing her side of how she feels about it versus how I feel about it, because she's the complete opposite of me. Her function stack is complete opposite, very sensory, all this stuff. It was interesting for both of us to kind of explore it together. Uh, but at the same time, my general advice as an INFJ: try to find girls that are a little bit pushy. I know that sounds weird. As an INFJ who doesn't like conflict, it's actually really good for you to have somebody who kind of brings that conflict into your life in a weird way, because not only will it make your life a little bit more interesting and it'll kind of force you out of these fucking loops you get stuck in a lot, but because your extroverted thinking is very bad, even if you come up with really good ideas and you come up with all these feelings about somebody and you kind of understand like what you want to do, how you actually do it is usually pretty awkward. So if you find a girl who isn't afraid to admit her feelings to you and be the instigator in the relationship, all the more better, in my opinion. If I could find a nice little fucking tsundere that'll fucking push me along and, you know, obviously, she might have a problem with kind of like admitting her feelings, but as long as I understand those feelings, I'm fine with it. A little bit pushy, that's fine, man. I used to look for like really quiet, shy girls, but as I dated those kind of girls, I really started realizing that our relationships were fucking completely silent. We would just not talk about anything, uh, and it would take forever to actually start having deep conversations. Obviously, once we did, it was great. Uh, but at the same time, I'm a very impatient person. Uh, just like I've been through so many things and just constantly stuck in this like loop of deja vu and kind of like constantly going through the same cycles over and over again. I just kind of get tired of it now. So I'm very impatient. So if I meet a girl who's like very energetic and kind of like pushes things along, that's great for me. I love that. It's like, thank you. You're saving me so much work. Like I don't have to like, because I might have like really interesting romantic beautiful ideas, right, that come to me of how I want to express my feelings, how I want our date to go, but how it actually comes into fruition, because extrovert thinking is very, very bad. It's generally extremely awkward. So if you find somebody who appreciates that and kind of can see the deeper meaning behind your actions, and appreciates and thinks it's cute, and what you're doing is kind of awkward, but they understand like what you're trying to do anyway, those are going to be really good relationships for you, uh, because it's going to be awkward. INFJs, when it comes to relationships and romantic relationships in particular, you're always going to be extremely, extremely awkward because you are a super optimistic romantic deep down, and the way you think about romance and the way you think about people and the way you feel about people, especially because you're pulling up on their feelings too, is going to be extremely strong. But because you have no fucking idea of how to actually implement those feelings, you're you're gonna do a lot of awkward things. So my advice is keep it simple. Uh, Simple is better. Don't try to do any kind of things that are grandiose. Uh, Understand that some people can't read in between the lines of what you're doing. So unless you know that like they're the type of person that can kind of understand the meaning behind these really awkward things you're doing or saying, uh, try to just keep it simple. For me, I get gifts. Everybody's got their own love language. You can look that up. There's a bunch of different love languages. For me, it's just gifting. I don't ever buy gifts. I don't ever gift things to people, mostly because it's just like it's not something I do. But when I do it, it's because it's a sign of affection. Like if I really care about you, I'm gonna go out of my way to spend money and buy you things and think about things like that. Uh, so I would usually just leave gifts, like little gifts. I won't say anything. I won't. I'll even make it even less awkward by just like leaving a little card and just leaving it on their desk, or just mailing it to them, or just dropping it off without involving myself into the equation. This way I don't like have like this any weird looks on my face or say anything really awkward, even though in my head I might have like this entire romantic like monologue conversation planned out, but the way I actually execute it because of this is usually pretty bad. uh this probably is the case for a lot of INFJs. It's a little bit easier for female INFJs because female INFJs can be awkward, cute, and shy and whatever, and be a little weird. And usually, guys in general will kind of like that thing. So good for you. It's lucky for you. But for INFJ males, oh god, good luck. It's pretty difficult. Uh, just kind of embrace it for what it is. Try to keep things simple. Don't overcomplicate it. And just know if you're a female interested in an INFJ male, especially an INFJ male, if you're waiting for them to confess their feelings to you, it's never gonna happen. You unless like they get unless they're like me and they're just kind of impatient because of just experiences, they will almost never do it. Just because this is really weak, this is really weak. Uh, these decision making factors are really bad for them. They don't practice this a lot either, so they'll constantly be thinking about this and this and this. So and then they'll start misunderstanding things. There usually will always be a misunderstanding because they're not going to communicate with you properly, because this is how INFJs are. They're never going to communicate properly if they don't have these things flushed out. So they'll just kind of start assuming your feelings because they'll start like falling into like a weird little loop with this. And then they'll get way too scared to, mostly because of this, if they have bad experiences in the past. If they have bad experiences in the past because of this function right here, they will never tell you their feelings. They will be your best friend for 30 years, be secretly in love with you those entire 30 years, and they will never tell you. That is just who they are. It's how we function, especially because of this. It's a very huge fear factor for us. Also because we don't even know how to do it without just being direct and upfront about it. And generally, we don't want to do that because we don't want to make you feel awkward, and we don't want to pressure you into feelings. It's a weird. INFJs are really weird. You have to be patient with us. You need to engage us. You'd be surprised. I'm not saying if you have an interest in a male INFJ or even a female one, I'm not saying just jump the gun and be like, hey, I like you, let's date, blah, blah, blah. But, kind of give them concrete little positive signs healthily, and just over time, and confirm things with them a lot. The best advice I can give you for relationships with INFJs is to communicate a lot and kind of confirm things a lot. Because what ends up happening is if we very much through you will notice little changes in your feelings or your emotional state. We very much will start noticing that very fast, especially with this too. If they start developing this, this becomes more healthy as the relationship goes on. And because of these two, and because we're very good at reading and understanding people and feelings and noticing little trends and traits and characteristics in people's mannerisms, they will very quickly start to know if something's going on. And if you don't communicate that almost instantly and recognize that with them and start reconfirming, like, yes, I'm still in love with you, blah, 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 blah. Like, we're just like, we have some, there's bills we have to pay, a little stressed out, blah, blah, blah. If you don't get into that habit of that cycle with them, they will take that information and start fucking processing it like this, okay? They're like, why is this? What will happen? Why is this happening? What is going on? They will start fucking just going like this in this little circle, okay? And then it'll just get bad. They'll start misunderstanding, having misunderstandings. They'll start overanalyzing your behavior. Just know it's annoying. I'm gonna tell you this. INFJs, you should work on not doing this. But anybody dating an INFJ or interested in a friendship with an INFJ, just know these two functions are always pumping. They're unconscious functions for us. They're not something we can control. Sorry for spitting. I got like fucking hair in my mouth. Uh, these are always going. These babies right here are always pumping information. Whether the INFJ even realizes they're doing it or not, they are watching you, observing you, and taking a mental notes in their subconscious about every little thing you do. Uh, it could be even like just slight eye adjustments, just like nervous taps or I always notice people's nervous ticks. It's really annoying for me. If I see somebody, maybe they tap their pinky or just something subtle that most people don't notice, I fucking notice that shit like instantly, and it drives me insane. I'm just like, Jesus Christ, can you stop doing that, please? Uh, they are always pumping these things, so just be aware of that. If that's something that's going to bother you long term, be aware of that. Be open to discussion about it. Relationships are about work, okay? Everything's not going to be perfect. INFJs out there who have this struggle, you're never going to find a perfect relationship. Human beings are imperfect. Even if you get this, you rationalize it through MBTI, and you're like, well, our functions are perfectly opposite or compatible with each other and balance each other out perfectly. Just know that through changes in your life and your growth and just experiences and things that happen to you, different functions will take over at different times. So just because these are all lining up right now, they might not line up perfectly in the future. Like maybe this starts taking over more in your relationship than these other ones. Okay, you need to understand that nobody is perfect. Relationships are work. You have to work through these things by communicating. So for INFJ, your struggle is going to be about taking these things, okay, that you're just naturally feeding into this, and then when you start thinking about it with this, you need to then take it, fucking throw it back into this, and then like combine it with this, uh, and just start talking about it. Okay, you need to practice this a little bit when you get into a relationship, so you can actively communicate and figure out how to handle things that happen. Uh, Communication is everything for an INFJ. If you're dating one or you are one, communication for you is going to be the biggest thing, and it's going to be the thing that keeps your relationship together. Understand that. Uh, People like other INFJs, people are not going to be able to read what is going on right here for you. Okay, so unless you share this actively with your partner or your friends, they are never going to figure it out. Okay, it is what it is. We are the only ones that have this. Okay, other people are not going to be able to read this. You need to explain it to them. You need to practice this. Okay, practice this so you can explain it to them as best as you can, at least at a somewhat understandable level, and then working through it together. Maybe this is a strong point for them. They can then help you explain it better to yourself and help you understand it better of what's happening, and focus on this, what is happening in the now. The future is important. You should, it's good to think about it, but like once you're in the relationship, you really need to start using this a lot more and just focusing on what is happening right now and communication. And this applies to anybody in general. If you're dating an INFJ, just understand that. Reconfirm with them a lot. I'm not saying like every day, every once in a while, just reconfirm with them, do something together, have a conversation, just reconfirm like, hey, I'm still in love with you, we're still friends. Uh, as long as you do that, INFJ relationships are actually pretty easy to maintain. I mean, I have friends I talk to maybe like once a month, but when we do talk, they always kind of manage to reaffirm like, hey, we're still friends. I still care about you. I'm just busy doing my own thing in my life. And when we do talk, I get plenty out of it. So there's no reason to end the relationship because we don't talk that often. So relationships with INFJs and friendships with INFJs is actually pretty easy. I mean, the relationship that I had with my own INFJ friend in real life, me and her grew up together, and we had that connection. But there was times when we wouldn't even talk to each other or hang out for, I don't know, like a year. But and then we would just naturally fall back into it with no issue like whatsoever, because we would just, it always reaffirmed that, like, yes, like we're friends still. So once you establish the baseline friendships and relationship with an INFJ, it's really easy to maintain it. uh, as long as you just understand how their thinking pattern is. Like, uh, if something is wrong, communicate it. As long as you're communicating with them at least somewhat, and at least once in a while, and just reaffirming things for them, so they don't get misunderstandings and they're fucking the weird way our minds work, everything will be good. Okay, so super easy to maintain friendship with them, and relationships with them as long as you do that. So it's gonna take a little bit of work from everybody. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for this video. The video's been extremely long. If there's anything else you guys would like to know about INFJs, let me know. Or other types. I can do other types. I'm not so much familiar with like the SJs and the SPs, but any of the NFs or NTs, I know a lot about. I've dealt with a lot of them. These are primarily like my friend base right here, and my relationships are usually involving these types. I'm not so familiar with these types, but I can still do videos on them. This video is extremely long. There's a lot into it. There's a lot of my own personal stuff involved into it, my own personal opinions, but hopefully some of you agree with them. So, I mean, I can't really think of anything else to really talk about. I think I've pretty much completely talked about INFJs and the struggles you're going to deal with. I mean, I could talk about some stereotypes. We can go over like some for this last part of the video just to finish it up. INFJ stereotypes. Okay, let's look at this one. So, stereotype right here is that INFJs like to be by themselves. No, like I said, important part of being an INFJ is social interaction. You have to do it. You're a social animal. I'm sorry, INFJs. I know it's gonna be a struggle, but like I told you before, even if you really think about it, and you know too, trust me, when you go to that party that you were like paranoid about going to, and like you were in your mind, you were fucking going through this little loop right here, about what will happen at the party and why is it going to happen, and then somewhat you were processing this, like maybe there's somebody at the party that doesn't like you, so you were kind of using that as an excuse not to go, even though there's 30 fucking people at the party, and let's say 29 of them like you and want you there, and then one person doesn't. Because of how you work, you're probably thinking, well, that one person doesn't like me, I don't want to make things awkward for everybody, so I'm not going to go. Like, you'll use any kind of justification or excuse you can, especially with this. So just don't do it. Just go. Try to get over these and just go. 9 times out of 10, once these two babies start kicking in, they're like fucking like adrenaline starts pumping through your body. I like to call these like your adrenaline functions. You're gonna have a good time, and you are, and then you're gonna go home and you're gonna be happy you went. For the most part, that isn't always not the case. Sometimes you have a negative experience at a party, but for the most part, in my own personal experience, as long as I try to get over that initial excuse making that I do, I don't focus so much on this of being my reason of why I do something, and I just do it. I usually end up having a good time. Never see myself as creative. The writing. Creative. Okay, so this is another stereotype, is that INFJs are really like artistically creative, which isn't always the truth. I think like the way he describes it is we're more insightful than creative, which I will kind of agree upon. There's obviously INFJs that'll have a strong sense of creativity in the natural sense of the word, but for the most part, I like to describe what I have as more of like deep insights into things. I don't really create things. I mostly take what's already there and offer deeper insights and exploration into it. Okay, so that's kind of how you can understand it, and at least how I understand it for myself. I'm not good at creating things. Okay, if you ask me to, like, for example, I'm part of an esports organization. Okay, I'm the CEO of the company. Okay, uh, but if you ask me to create that company, I couldn't do it. So I always kind of need that more administrative, creative, entrepreneurial person there to manage those things. But where my strengths come in is I can offer deeper insights into the structure and environment of the organization and offer deep insights of how to improve it and things like that. It's almost like you're better at improving things that already exist than creating things. Okay, INFJs are very much not creators. We are very much uh improvers, improvers, improvers. Okay, that doesn't sound right. We're very much more of like improving things that already exist. Okay, offering deeper insight, connecting those things to other things that exist. Uh, we don't create things. Okay, we're not good at that. We're very good at just uh, coaching, mentoring. You take somebody who's already there, who exists. Uh, this is kind of a weird example now, but hopefully you get what I'm trying to say. I don't want to get too weird, and because the example I had in my head was like kind of awkward and didn't really make sense now I think about it. So the stereotype that we're like psychic, when to us it just feels like a natural thing just to be able to connect simple stuff. Uh, yeah, this is kind of true. Some people, not everybody. I think most people don't feel this way anymore. But some people used to think that like we're all kind of like mystical psychics, and we have a superpower, and that like we're all kind of involved into like weird metaphysical shit. That's not true. Like I'm super skeptical of like any kind of like tarot reading or spiritual shit like that, and I'm not religious at all, but at the same time I still have like a somewhat fascinating interest in it just because it's interesting just to get involved in that and hope that there's something greater out there. I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain, but for the most part I would say most INFJs even that I know aren't even religious at all. Actually, I don't think yeah, the two INFJs I know the closest, I know other INFJs that come to INFJ. I don't talk to them as much, but the two INFJs that are very close friends to me, obviously one of them's not anymore. Is like they're so far from religion, it's not even funny. But the funny part is even though we're super against religion, we're very much into spiritualism and ascending our own kind of sense of self and stuff. It's kind of interesting actually. A lot of people classify as being cold and mysterious and complicated, but we're not psychic. This is something with INFJs that I was explaining throughout the video, and hopefully people understand is people like to overcomplicate us. We ourselves like to overcomplicate who we are and what we actually feel. But at the end of the day, and this applies to most people, we're complicated, but we're very, very simple complicated. Like I said, if you want to have a relationship with an INFJ or a friendship, like any kind of relationship whatsoever, it's extremely easy. You don't even need to have similar interests to us because at the end of the day, INFJs really don't have their own interests. At least at first, we kind of develop our own interests by figuring out what other people like, and then kind of trying those things and kind of determining it for ourselves. Okay, so it's super easy to be friends with INFJ, uh, as long as you're not a fake fucking douchebag, because we're gonna pick up on that. And as long as you're not like really manipulative, we'll generally be friends with you, or at least acquaintances. Will we be super close friends with you? Probably not. Will you be able to like really understand who we are? Probably not, because we don't understand ourselves. It's just an inherent part of who we are because of how our functions work. We will always be in a constant kind of like limbo of not really knowing who we are or what we value. It's kind of like our life goal of figuring that out. Okay, so because we lack these value, because we lack these functions, and well, we don't lack them, but because they're so weak, this is our inherent goals in life. We want to be able to find things that we value as important and have meaning to us. We want to think about what could be in our lives through those values, and we want to know how to implement those values, and we want to be able to accomplish those things and look back at our past in a positive light. You can almost consider the shadow functions for an INFJ as the INFJ's actual kind of purpose and deeper meaning to their lives. We generally want to achieve these functions. Okay, we want to use these functions to achieve these functions. It's kind of weird. Hopefully that makes sense. It makes sense to me as an INFJ because I know very much like that's kind of how I feel. I really kind of want to discover through other people and my extroverted feeling like what I find important to myself, like what's actually means to me, like what is the meaning to my life, what is the meaning to the things, what do I really want from my life. I want to be able to figure out how to do that, to do those things, implement these ideas, these visions I have. I want to implement them into reality. I want to look back on my past and think about my past and have like a positive outlook on it. I don't want to think about it negatively. I don't want to remember all these shameful things I've done or had to experience or all this regret. I want to look back on it positively. So that's what you can consider the shadow functions. Um, that's pretty much it at the end of the day. At least to me, it's complicated, but it's extremely simple. Where some types might have, especially like an INTJ, might have some like really outlandish, crazy ideal they want to make into reality, and it's really hard to understand, and it's convoluted. INFJs are very much pretty simplistic. We just kind of want to understand ourselves and the people around us. So we're not as mysterious and complicated as you think. And the only reason why we seem that way is because we have a lot of walls and barriers up that kind of prevent people from getting too close because of our the functions that are really weak for us are prevent us, especially this one. If you have a lot of past regrets and a lot of bad experiences in relationships and people, which you probably will as an INFJ just because of how it naturally grows, you're going to be very guarded. So people can get the wrong idea. Uh, uh, yeah. So like I said, like we're not very cold. We might appear that way. A lot of people think what I say is cold sometimes, or just the way I talk can be kind of unattached and cold, but it's not really the case. It's just I don't know how to really explain that one. It's just kind of I guess that is a stereotype though, like just the way we talk and seem sometimes. Uh, but yeah, we're definitely not psychic, extremely future oriented. That's true. Like it might seem we're psychic, but we're just kind of connecting the dots from past experiences and things around us. They're just kind of, and we're always oriented to this area. So because we're always oriented here, we're very good at predicting it. Okay, just like historians, uh, uh, historians are also pretty good at this because they have a really good understanding of the past and they understand that past events tend to repeat in weird ways. We very much take in all the details around us and connect all the dots, and this is like our what we're always concentrated on. So yeah, I don't know how to explain it any simpler than that. It's just because like we're not psychic, we just this is what we're always thinking about. So and we're not always right either. So just because we predict the future 60% of the time, it's only 60%, which it might be higher than most people. But that's because we're so extremely focused on this that it just makes our percentage logically of predicting those things higher. I guess this is true too. I mean, I'm complicated, but I'd rather be complicated than basic. But at the same time, I also argue logically within myself a lot of the times that if I was a lot more basic and more of a sensory type and could just appreciate what's around me more, I would probably be a lot happier. But at the same time, everybody has their own struggles, so you could argue against that. So, but that's something I think about a lot is if my life was if the way I thought uh and the way my brain worked was a lot simpler and I was more appreciative of like my own current state, I think I would be happier. But at the same time, even if I did switch roles and that did happen to me, I could it probably comes with its own anxieties. People who are too concentrated in the present might be fearful of their future, whereas like I'm not fearful of the future because I have a pretty good understanding of how it's going to unfold, but I am terrified of my past. It's kind of weird. Wallflower. Uh, This is definitely not true too. This is a stereotype I see a lot too. Is that INFJs are wallflowers and they're like really passive. And I am not passive. If you guys have ever actually watched my streams, uh, because it's when I stream, there's nobody around me except myself. Uh, I think it brings out a lot more of my like my inner personality, and because because I'm not using this function and caring too much, like because I don't have people directly in front of me, I don't start putting on the masks, right? So I will very much just be pretty much focused on these functions right here. Okay, I will just be constantly just pulling up intuitive information and having to do with what's happening right now. This is why I can be pretty foul mouthed and aggressive when I'm online, and I don't have people in front of me, so I'm not pulling in any of this information. Even if there's people like in my chat room, because it's like a personal thing. Because this function really only works when you're like actually in the presence of other people. Uh, I don't I won't consider this at all. I'll just ignore it. So like how what I say and do, how it makes other people feel, it's not a concern for me because this function is not even activated in my brain because there's nobody there in my mind. According to my brain, it's just me in the room. So you're just gonna constantly get this, and yeah, it could lead to some pretty funny things coming out of my mouth. Uh, Definitely not a wallflower. I definitely actively engage with people. Most INFJs I know will actively engage with people. It's our primary source of getting information uh, and coming to understandings. Even the other INFJs I know, uh, we're quiet, but at the same time, we're not. Just know when we are quiet and we're just kind of in the corner, we're watching. We're watching, observing, and taking in information. And probably within at least a couple of minutes, you're probably going to get some kind of something's going to come out. Just know that. When an IOJ is quiet, I'm not going to say you should be worried. I'm just going to say don't assume that we're just sitting there doing nothing. We're probably observing you, which is kind of funny. INFJs aren't good leaders. This isn't true either. We're not good leaders in the sense of getting things done, I would say, because of extroverted thinking. Obviously, you can, like, I've been put in situations at work where I've had to become a leader and have coaching on it. So I did improve this a lot uh, of how to get things done constructively and how to assign people to tasks. But what makes us good leaders in terms of, you know, a more altruistic, I don't know what I'm trying to say, the word, I can't think of the word without sounding retarded, but what I'm trying to say, uh, we're very charismatic leaders. We're not systematic leaders in terms of like very like we're not efficient leaders, but we're very charismatic leaders. We're very good at getting morale up, inspiring people. Uh, oh god, the worst example you could possibly use is Adolf Hitler, and that's like the first thing that came in my mind is just like even though everything he did was flawed, uh, let's just ignore. Uh, you can't really ignore the elephant in the room when it comes to that guy, but from just an analytical point of view, the things he accomplished uh, are not because he had very strong extroverted thinking of how to do what he did. He was very good at surrounding himself with people who could do these things for him, and he was very good at uniting those people. INFJs are very good at uniting different kinds of people together that normally wouldn't go together. Okay, the people who would in any other circumstance be natural enemies and not like each other. This is why once again you can bring up that INFJ types or make your typical shonen characters because a lot of shonen characters, main characters are very good at like bringing together like former enemies to work together to a common goal, and they're usually the glue that binds them. A perfect example of this is like Reinhardt Lohengrin or whatever from Galactic Heroes, that really old show. I don't necessarily know you could consider. You can't really consider. I wouldn't consider Reinhardt an INFJ, but he might probably like an INTJ more than anything. I think. But INTJs are pretty similar in leadership ability to INFJ. A little bit better though, because they're very good at efficiently getting things done. I'm just trying to use the example of how he combines and attracts all these different types of people together, and kind of keeps them together. Uh, Obviously, he does it through this by achieving results. That's how INTJs do it. But in the INFJ world, we do it because of this. Uh, we're very good at kind of reading people's feelings and emotions, and noticing trends. So we're very good at kind of controlling people through their feelings. That's what I was trying to go with that. Sorry if that kind of didn't make any sense. Uh, we make good leaders because we're very good at kind of manipulating people's feelings to kind of get them all on board into common goals. Uh, we're yeah, even right here. Not we our energies lead in non-traditional ways, so our style leadership is recognized in cutthroat world of business. This is very true. We're very good at leading from behind. Uh, no, we're not. Um, Let me get my train of thoughts here. Yeah, right here. We walk along each member. Okay, we we use other people's abilities. I'm very good at understanding what everybody's good at. Okay, in my personal opinion, everybody has their strengths and their weaknesses. Okay, so if I'm not good at math and analyzing like statistics and statistical data, I will find somebody who is good at that, and I'm very good at being able to identify people's strengths and weaknesses, and that is the INFJ traits that make them good leaders. We're very good at putting people into positions where they will do well. That's why I think INFJs are very good in actually very high positions. So like CEOs, stuff like that. So for example, I'm the pretty much the head of staff for the org that I work for, which is pretty much the perfect position for me. It's not the very top, so I don't have to deal with all the political bullshit that goes along with it. But I'm very good at recognizing talent, very good at recognizing people who have motivation, the strengths and weaknesses of people, and helping put people into positions on the staff that will bring out the most in them. So that's what INFJs are very good at. Uh, yeah, he even says right here manipulation. It's not our intention to manipulate, but at the same time, because we can read the emotions of people and know how to work around them, we're very good at making people who naturally don't get along, and make everybody kind of follow into a common goal. Uh, I know I used it as an example. It's a really bad one, but if you use Adolf Hitler as an example, because he is an INFJ, very much in the true sense of the word, he pretty much united an entire country and almost half the planet in a very very wrong mindset, but he still managed to do it, and he united people that normally would not get along. Like just the fact that Japan joined the Axis forces is a fucking act of straight out legend in its own right, because that is a country that refused to really associate or do anything with anybody, and somehow they convinced them to join their side and become allies. That in itself is pretty much showcases the influential power of INFJs and just the things they can do. If you want leadership in the terms of the traditional business sense, a leader who efficiently gets things done, that's not an INFJ. But if you want a leader who can unite multiple perspectives and different types of people that normally would never be able to get along to accomplish a common goal, that is what INFJs are very good at. That's why shonen main character unites all these different enemies together to usually fight a bigger, badder enemy. That's what INFJs are good for. Uh, INFJs have stereotype of being dreamer. I'm more heavily bent towards the practical. All right, we're back. I paused the video, so if this seems weird, all of a sudden it just cuts back into an hour later, which is good for you, right? Because I've been drinking rum this whole time just to make it easier. I don't know. You're probably judging me that I'm drinking at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, but it is New Year's, and I'm not drinking that much, and it just makes me more comfortable and gets things to come out of my mouth I normally wouldn't say. So it should be more interesting. I honestly forgot where we left off. I think we talked about leadership in INFJs. I think that should be it for that. Uh, INFJ stereotype of being a dreamer. We're supposed to be a paradox, idealism and practicality. I think I'm more practical. This is true. This is what it goes into when I talked about how there's different types in INFJs. I think certain functions do start to take over your life a little bit more depending on your environment and your circumstance. Oh God, sorry, that's gross. According to your circumstances, uh, obviously, if I'm in a job that requires me to be using my analytical thinking skills, my introverted thinking function is going to start taking a little bit more precedent over my other ones. Obviously, it doesn't change who I am as a core person. These will always be my primary functions, but uh, my honest opinion, you use what function correlates to whatever situation you're in. So if I'm in a situation that requires me to be using my introverted thinking, I'm going to be using that. So that's why this person is talking about how he feels he's much more practical and analytical, and he can come across as much more aloof and rigid and warm and affirming. I think this is also a stereotype too that INFJs are very warm, affirming people. I think INFJs are very strong extroverted feeling functions can seem that way, but I would say that's more of an ENFJ thing. ENFJs very much have a problem of this being way too strong and kind of being way too warm and affectionate towards people. Whereas I think INFJs are a good balance between being analytical and kind of aloof and rigid. I think this is more accurate description, to be honest with you. I don't think this is accurate at all. We definitely can be those things. I think it's more of this is when we're in close friendships and relationships, and this is generally what we are most of the time. This comes from having an interest in somebody, and once we're interested in you, FE kind of takes over. Whereas this is our general state most of the time. Um, yeah. Uh, in terms of being a dreamer, uh, definitely I wouldn't even say that because, like this guy says, I think dreaming implies optimism. Generally, the way introverted intuition works is not optimistic. This generally leads to very negative conclusions. I think I've talked about it before. So I wouldn't say we're so much dreamers as much as we're idealists and innovators. I don't think that's the word I'm trying to use, but yeah, hopefully you understand what I'm saying. I emphasize very well, but but I don't want to use physical affection, e.g., hugs. Okay, so when it comes to this, uh, I never read any stereotypes that say INFJs are like huggy, feely people, but when it comes to the way you display love and affection, everybody's different. That has nothing to do with type. I know INTPs who are normally stereotyped as being very detached and not emotional, and don't like hugging people. Uh, I know INTPs that are actually the complete opposite of that, and because it's not something they like to do, they do it to show affection. So generally, the way people show affection is different for everyone, and it generally revolves around something you don't like to do. Because if you're showing affection to people and you physically show that how you care, it generally be you do it in a way that you don't normally do things, and that's kind of stresses the importance and helps underlie the uh overlying idea that you care about somebody. So for me, it's gift giving, and uh yeah, I use I use gift giving to do that. Yeah, everybody upstairs is really loud. I apologize. So in this case, this person doesn't like to use physical affection. It's perfectly okay. It has nothing to do with being INFJ or not INFJ, in my personal opinion. He doesn't like touching. He doesn't think he thinks he's more creepy. He just likes to observe people. This is somebody who probably has this more than this. It also could be extroverted feeling. You could argue that, and because of the people he's surrounded by, he doesn't feel it's necessary to display feelings through physical touch because it could be something he picks up on subconsciously that it's something that people around him don't prefer. This is something is really hard to deal with a lot of INFJs, and it makes them really hard to type because a lot of the times the way the extroverted feeling gets shown is a lot of subconscious intuitive information that we pull from people. So there's cases where I'm with a group of people that are a lot more touchy feely and laugh all the time, and then I kind of naturally do that. And there's also times where I'm in a very serious environment. People don't touch. People are very professional with each other. They don't show any kind of affection with each other. And these are like groups of friends I hang out with, and I will kind of cater to that. So this could be a product of his environment that he's in, where he's constantly around people that don't like physical affection. You might be in a professional environment, and then subconsciously his extroverted feeling is manifesting that way. So and he just likes observing people. This is very INFJ thing. INFJ is very observing. This is where the physical thing comes. The stereotype that INFJs all have like these really deep stares. Uh, I, it's not really. I mean, it's just from observing people. It's not like some kind of weird superhuman thing. Like if, when I'm watching people and I have nothing to do, like I'm observing my environment and I'm observing people, and I was like, I just stare. Like it's I try to do it from a distance so it doesn't freak people out. So that's what I suggest if you're gonna do that, do it from a distance. Um, very analytical. MIT had this long enjoy logical, healthy, abstract. This is also another thing I was talking about, how different functions can take priority depending in situation. He could be in a job that forces his analytical skills to come up to the forefront. Uh, so this is why stereotypes always make me laugh. Some of them are true, but a lot of them aren't. So yeah. I think Andre's gave to being uber sensitive and empathetic. He doesn't really understand. He doesn't feel like empathy relates to the same way as him and his ENFP girlfriend or wife. I mean, so yeah, this is something that comes up a lot with INFJs, being hypersensitive and super empathetic. So my feelings are this are kind of tie into what I said before. I think it has a lot to do with your environment, who you're around, how other people's sense of empathy works. In my opinion, the kind of empathy you have directly correlates subconsciously from the people around you because of your extroverted feeling and your introverted intuition, how they work together. Um, your so him personally, if he hasn't personally gone through something relatable, he can't understand it. Uh, so for that, I guess the best way I can talk about this is just kind of explain it from my own point of view. I don't consider myself hypersensitive, but like if I watch a sad movie, I will cry. There's also days sometimes where I don't know if I'm subconsciously picking up on somebody else's feelings or I'm subconsciously being kind of my own feelings are being drawn out uh, that I don't understand yet, and they're being drawn out from some kind of symbolic trigger or something somebody said, uh, and it just kind of triggers something subconscious in me. This happens sometimes. I have days where like I'll be in the mood that I don't understand. I feel like shit. I'm either like really angry or extremely sad. Uh, I've had times where I just like started crying and I don't even know why. Uh, I think it's very possible to for good writers and artists to really put emotion into non-human things like writing and film. So if I watch like a really sad anime, I can get emotional. We don't even realize it sometimes. Sometimes I don't even know why. Whether it's a subconscious trigger for myself or it's picking up the emotions from the characters in the show. This one's really hard to explain. I don't think empathy has. I don't think the correlation between empathy and being sensitive is so much an INFJ trait as much as it kind of differs from person to person. Uh, I have a hard time telling whether the feelings that I'm feeling are my own or I'm pulling them in from an outside source. This is something that INFJs kind of struggle with because of our extroverted feeling. So between the extroverted feeling and then the lack of introverted feeling that we have, it makes it really difficult. So I think this is somebody who's either not an INFJ or he's just somebody who doesn't really understand his own sense of empathy. Um, I don't think all INFJs are super sensitive and empathetic. I'm very uh, not empathetic for a lot of things. Uh, I guess if it has to do with myself, I'm less empathetic about it. So like if I have a close friend die or a family member of mine die, like, hang on, I gotta sneeze. I guess I'm not as sensitive to that as I am for other people. If somebody cries in front of me and it's like genuine tears, which I generally would just kind of be able to tell whether it's genuine or not, it will honestly bother me. Uh, if you know told me, I guess if I one of the reasons I don't watch the news or TV is actually because I get bothered a lot. Like if I see these terrorist attacks and things happen. Recently there was the guy who got shot because of a fucking stupid idiot kid calling in swattings on people. Uh, that made me feel like really sick to my stomach and made me fucking really nauseous and upset and pissed me off. Things like that. So I guess that could be hypersensitivity. Maybe it is not an INFJ thing. I don't know how I feel about this. Uh, it's very possible he could not be an INFJ. It's not something I've talked about too much with other INFJs. I guess in terms of observing my female friend INFJ, she kind of does the same thing I do. But at the same time, like I've even tested it. There's shows that I've watched that like just kind of trigger emotions in me uncontrollably, and we watch them together, and she just gets nothing out of it. So I think empathy is a person by person thing, and it's not something synonymous with typing. But I think some types are more obviously more sensitive because of how their functions work. I just opened my Crunchyroll. I guess I had that up because I'm too lazy to close it right now. Uh, because of how extroverted feeling works and our own lack of values, I think we very easily pick up on other people's emotions. So empathy is kind of weird. I absolutely hate strangers. Ask about my day. I have a career in engineering. I like technical subject way more than humanities, social sciences, design. I mean, we're 50% right and left brained, so we can literally fall into any one of these categories. I personally enjoy technical stuff just as much as I enjoy getting into philosophy and social sciences. I personally get turned off more by this stuff because of the people who do get involved in it. Because in a weird way, I almost feel like it's more of the sensory types that seem to get involved in humanities and social sciences more than it is actually like the empathetic, like more NF types or something like that. So when I do get involved in those groups and start actually talking about this stuff, they usually have like really rigid and one track minds on a lot of these things, and it just like it doesn't sit right with me, and so I don't traditionally like to get involved in it. I like to think about it on my own. I don't like to get involved in it in an actual structured sense. But I love engineering myself and technical stuff and building things. I think it's because, uh, yeah, like I said, we're left and right brained. We have very logical functions and we have very emotional functions. So I think it caters to either way. Um, I also hate this too. Uh, Even people I've known for years, like if I don't consider you a close friend, I really don't like to kind of like talk to you too deeply. I don't like talking about small talk. This is 100% an INFJ trait. Uh, INFJs, much like INTPs, we don't like stupid small talk. We'll do it, but it's like forced, and we're good at it because of our FE, but it's not something we really like to do. For the most part, uh, I don't even like kind of having to go out of my way and saying hi to people. I find those kind of like social norms like really irritating. I've been like hounded and harassed by like bosses and shit in the past. They'll be like, it's like you're so rude. You don't even say like I've had them like you're that person's so rude. Like I say hello to them and they don't really say anything back to me. I'm just like it's like because some people just don't like I don't there's nothing wrong with that. Somebody doesn't say hi to me when I say hi to them, it doesn't bother me. I'm just like hey, and I keep walking. Like I I don't know, it's one of those weird things. Some types just won't understand and some will, but this is definitely pretty true. The world around the word around the block is INFJs are warmer and affectionate and just know things about people before they happen. If you know me outside on my group of very small friends, you assume I'm the opposite. This is very true. This is the same thing for me. Outside of a very, very tiny group of people, for me it's extremely small. It's maybe like 2 or 3 people in general in existence that actually know that understand like the meaning behind a lot of the things I do, and understand that I'm actually like yeah, pretty I get my feelings hurt pretty easily, but I don't show it. Pretty much cut that off from showing people. But on the outside, most people, especially in my work environment, a lot of people, until they kind of come to understood me after like many years, generally assumed I was just kind of like, you know, a quiet asshole. Like, just don't talk to him, leave him alone. Like, don't associate with him. Uh, yeah, right here. Avoid deep conversation with strangers. Uh, when people try to get emotional reaction to me, it would piss me off. It pisses me off too. People who try to get me into like, oh, why don't you smile? Why don't you? Oh my god, please stop. And it's hard too because you have to train yourself as an INFJ to just kind of tell them like, I just don't want to. Uh, and you have to really train yourself to just kind of not be rude when you say it. Because naturally, it just triggers me. I don't get angry at a whole lot other than like, really heinous crimes and then inhumane shit that goes on. But like people who are just people, I had so many like older people especially too. They're always just like, they're like, why do you look so down? Why don't you smile? I'm just like, this is my normal face. I'm perfectly fine. Leave me alone. uh Fighting valiantly for our beliefs, yeah, no. So this guy doesn't have a whole lot of sense of morality and beliefs. Stereotype, I hear so much too. I hear this all the time. That INFJs have very strong beliefs and moralities, and we fight for those. That is completely untrue. Uh, our literally introverted feeling is one of our like worst shadow functions. Uh, we very much take in what we value from other people. So it might seem like we have a lot of core values and a lot of like, I would say we have a pretty strong sense of morality in a sense, like deep down, but our morality is also kind of fluctuates a lot. Uh, I think of a lot of evil things, and I consider a lot of evil things to be necessary. Like a lot of Machiavellian things I find very necessary, especially just the way the world works and through my own observations. But at the same time, will I act on those things? No, not necessarily. So you could argue that my sense of morality inherently is good. Uh, but when it comes to values and defending my own values, I will defend the values of other people, but I can't say I can defend my own values as much because I don't really have too many. But I will say where this probably does come from are, older, more functioning INFJs who have developed their introverted feeling and started to come up with their own values because it's not something we intrinsically do. When we do come up with something that is of value to us and we found it on our own and it has a solid meaning to us, we will pretty harshly defend it if we have to because it's important. We don't inherently just have a bunch of values like an INFP would. INFPs just have tons of different core values that make them who they are. And if you, I mean, you can just use INFPs as an example. My brother's an INFP, and I think it's because he's my brother. He's easier to deal with for me. Like I'm not as inherently wary of like crossing his values because he has some very strong values in his life, and if you cross those, uh, even if you're just poke at them even a little bit, he'll snap. INFPs, uh, stereotype is that they're like all really nice and bubbly. They're really not. INFPs are, I would say INFPs are almost like being INFP and INTPs. I would say those are like your real life like tsunderes. Uh, if you poke them the wrong way, they will snap at you, and yeah, it's very huge bursts of random anger. My brother was very capable of this a lot when he felt his values, that the things he values were being threatened or poked at or made fun of. Obviously, I didn't care as much, so we would fight sometimes uh, because he's a sibling. So I guess like I was more comfortable with invading his values, but uh, there's definitely something that can happen. Okay. I would definitely say it's definitely something that can happen, but in the case of this INFJ, they seem like they're in an NITI loop. They even admit it in a way. So they're probably not doing a whole lot of socializing. So in terms of what their important values are, they don't really have any because they're not pulling those values from other people and figuring out what feels right to them. That's pretty much how an INFJ will discover their own values. Is you can't really figure it out through here. This isn't gonna figure it out. This dominant Tetchery loop. You're gonna figure out your values as an INFJ. Sound like a broken record. I think I've described this 1,000 times. It's through these your sensory and your feeling. You're gonna pull these in from other people. You're gonna adopt other people's values and sense of what right and wrong just through your environment, and then slowly through processing those back through these two, you'll kind of somewhat over time gain your own sense of what's important to you. This sounds like somebody who doesn't do that. He probably doesn't, or he or she probably doesn't socialize too much, which they probably should. I'm not super clean or organized at all. This is a big one. One big INFJ stereotype is they're super organized and tidy. No, it's definitely one end of the spectrum or not. My INFJ female friend, super clean, super organized, labels things, everything, documents things. Me, if you could see what my room looked like right now, you would be horrified. But I will tell you, I know where everything is. Okay, so is I got that going on. I know where everything is. It's organized chaos. Okay, you either operate in a super clean, super organized environment, or you operate in organized chaos, as I like to call it. Yeah, so it's basically an all or nothing. I would say this is the most accurate thing for INFJs. The stereotype that we're all very super clean and organized is not true. In terms of how I present myself, yes. All right, I had to pause the video again. Sorry. If this bothers people, I'm sorry. I'm sure it's gonna bother some people, but I don't want to re-record this because it was like 2 hours long. So, like I was saying, it's either one or the other. In terms of what we showcase people, I always want to show people that I'm organized and clean, and I usually like to dress nice and contemporary when I go out. This is very much extroverted feeling. Without sounding like a broken record, once again, are what we value, and what people our values and everything is very much taken from other people. So how we appear to other people is extremely important to us. That's why a lot of INFJs in a public setting will generally be warm, affectionate, very, passive. Is that the reality of how we actually are as people? No. I think this is what gets confused a lot by a lot of people is they just assume this is how we are. It's really not. This is what we show you. We show you what you want to see because what you think about us means a lot. So what other people generally see us as and what generally people other feel us as feel we are is important. I think that's also why a lot of INFJs don't really speak out against the stereotypes and stuff that come along because, for the most part, we're fine if you thinking that we're super nice and you can trust us because, please, it makes my life easier. You can kind of you leave me alone. I don't get how people say INFJ is the most extroverted introverts out there and have a lot of and like they have a lot of friends in the time. Yeah, give me there. Okay, so he's misunderstanding it. It's not that you have a lot of friends; it's that you have a lot of acquaintances. Uh, Now, the reason why they say this is because we're comparing introverts like INTPs. INTPs will not even have a lot of acquaintances most of the time. INTPs don't generally take a lot of interest in people. They take interest in very few people. Uh, Obviously, this isn't the case for all INTPs, but for the majority of them, at least the ones I know, they have a very close knit of friends. They don't have a whole lot of acquaintances because it's a whole lot of wasted energy for them to have to be friendly with 20 or 30 people. Um, so yeah, this is why INFJs are considered the most extroverted. You are very much able to weave your way in and out of different groups of people without much effort. Uh, so this guy is kind of not understanding the general idea of what's happening. Uh, I see not a large group of friends. No, INFJs don't have a large group of friends. INFJs almost have no friends. It's not uncommon for INFJs to literally have no friends. And I don't mean that in the sense they don't socialize. I mean that in the sense that they just have multiple acquaintances. Some of the people who have known me the longest in my life, like literally don't know shit about me. Like my own family, for instance, they don't know anything. I think sometimes they even get surprised of some of the things I tell them, even now. This is just how it works. Uh, the people we consider close and the people we consider friends. For me personally, I put a very strong emphasis on friends. Uh, I have a very unique understanding of what makes a friend, and I wouldn't consider most people fit it. Let's just put it that way. And this is from me evaluating and taking other people's values, like friendship, and then thinking about it myself. And this is a value that I myself have come up with for friendship, and this is why it's something like I'm pretty adamant on. And even though some people don't agree with me, they're like, "Well, you're kind of your idea of a friend is a little like more than a friend." I would say that's more of like almost like a brothership, and that's kind of what I consider it. So I would say I maybe have at the moment after I burn bridges, probably have no friends right now, but normally I maybe have like one or two actual close friends that I share everything with. Uh, so his idea of the stereotype, it's not a stereotype. He's just not interpreting the right way. So I'm not super private person. I actually like to share my experience with people so we can move more intimately acquainted. Like I don't tell them my business, but this is actually a very INFJ thing. INFJs, you gotta understand is that we're so when he says shares isn't a super private person, I would say most INFJs aren't. Uh, we're actually pretty comfortable with sharing a lot because most superficial day to day life stuff we don't consider to be very deep or private. You know, I took a poop this morning. I don't find that to be super private. I don't have a problem with sharing, awkward stories about poops I've taken at home or if I was constipated that night. Those aren't super private to me. They're very superficial things. I don't have a problem sharing those. A lot of people think it's really funny too when I share those things. It's pretty funny sometimes, and it catches them off guard. But uh, in terms of privacy, what I am private about is like my own intellectual opinions on things and values. Uh, so a lot of the stuff I'm sharing with you in this video is extremely private. So this is why I'm drinking. I normally don't share any of this stuff, but when it comes to just basic superficial things or what's going on in my life, uh, I don't mind sharing, uh, as long as it doesn't give people a negative uh, outlook on who I am. It's kind of like a weird tipping toe thing with the extroverted feeling and living up people's expectations. So because most people in my life usually know that I'm pretty goofy, and half the fun that people enjoy from me is that they can't really tell when I'm being serious and not serious. And I just say a lot of sarcastic things a lot, and kind of I say things to kind of catch people off guard. That's kind of how my humor works. I just kind of catch you off guard for random things sometimes, and facial expressions that kind of throw people off because a lot of times I'm not kind of wearing any expression, and then I'll kind of just start throwing random expressions out at you, or I'll communicate mostly through my hands or through like weird expressions and kind of like just kind of just do like really awkward things because people expect that. I think I do it more. So this person could also be in an environment where their FE allows them to be more open like that with people. I wish I was organized when I'm not. Yes, me too, dude. Me too. But every time I try to get organized, it overwhelms me and I just want to throw everything away. But then I can't do that because I have connections to everything in my life and I'm a hoarder. I feel like most people generalize is having it really together in terms of organization and follow through in a negative way. I don't fit these qualities. This is very true. I would like to say this keeps getting brought up, but yeah, it is quite common that INFJs are considered super organized, uh, things like that, uh, and punctual. I would say the punctuality thing is true for me. I usually like to show up early. I think it's more of like a comfort thing. Also because I get lost a lot, so I think if I give myself a little 15 minutes early, I can kind of figure things out. I also kind of like overthink and get myself like anxiety just when I go to new places, just because I'm stupid and I do it because I'm an idiot. Uh, but I definitely am not organized, and it's almost like a negative thing. My desk at work, they used to make comments about it all the time, like about how messy my desk was. But like all my work would always be like the work I would produce would always be perfectly clean. You couldn't even tell, like it would always come out perfect, nothing wrong with it. So my desk would be messy, but my work would be clean. So it's like the process I would use seems messy and disorganized, but for me, it's organized. Okay, so I don't know how to explain it any better than that. I'm not always as quiet as I'm made out to be. I'm generally quite logical because both of my parents, although I do need some degree of order in my life, I'm not good at imposing on myself. My limitations not always neat. It builds up my personality until I clean, and the process repeats. Yes, this is pretty much it. It's kind of a process of cleaning out. We kind of hold on to things for too long. I think INFJs are almost all hoarders in a sense, especially. The reason why I say this is just based off myself, and then like the INFJ I know in real life, she hoards a lot of things, and she doesn't even know why, and then she gets pissed off about it, and she just starts throwing things out. And I do the same thing. Uh, he's really good at math. Like I said, I attribute a lot of dominant function types to uh, your environment because I mean, he or she even admits their parents are blah blah blah, real mathematical analytical types. That's kind of what she's fallen into. This is because of expectations set by her parents, and her FE is making her value the things her parents or his parents make him value. It's just how it works. Maybe in the future he'll realize he doesn't like math and find something else. That's just kind of how NFJs work. They're very aloof. We can kind of go from one thing to the other, always kind of flip flopping ideals and shit. Very early in our life, this is a very common INFJ characteristic, in my opinion. Is you will be very aloof and kind of every time the wind blows, you might pick up like a new hobby. Okay, this is something that used to drive my friends insane is like every week I would be picking up like a new hobby. One week I would be super interested in video games. Next week I'd be super interested in like some kind of weird psychology thing. Next week I'd be super interested in music and exploring a new genre. Then next week I'd be picking up instruments. Do you know how many fucking musical instruments I own that I've never played? Do you know how many video games that I own and have never played because all of a sudden I get like a random interest in a certain type or genre or a game, but then I never actually play it because like, or I'll play it for like a day and then I'll be like, all right, I had enough, and I'll fall into something else. It's just, it's a never-ending cycle for INFJs. You're just gonna have to deal with it. Just because I'm a tutor doesn't mean I'm a psychic. This goes back to the psychic thing. We're not psychic. We're just very good at a combination of just subconscious connections based on uh, data we get from sensing and feeling things around us, and then processing that analytically and logically. And because our mindset is more oriented to the future, we're very good at predicting trends and things that are going to happen, especially when it comes to interpersonal anything interpersonal. So anything involving people, society, we're very good at kind of just predicting things that are going to happen. Is it 100% accurate? No, it's. I would say it's not very accurate at all. Especially intuition. Your introverted intuition is not accurate. Introverted intuition is not good at coming to conclusions by itself. Okay, it's very good at connecting things all into one point, but the reason why it's good at that is because of this, because we're able to kind of filter things out with this and then confirm those things with these two. Okay. I see more positive on IJ's notes on IJ forums, so many negative. This makes me laugh because it's so true. Having tough be so rare and misunderstood. A super type is something to be proud of the liability. Okay, so this might string a whole lot of hate my way. My honest opinion is that most of these INFJs on these forums and on the Reddit page are not INFJs. I think because people started talking about how INFJs are prone to depression issues and things like that, it's kind of become the fad to assume that there must be a reasoning behind my depression that isn't my own fault. So I'm just going to assume it's because I'm super rare and misunderstood, and I must be an INFJ. I'm going to tell you right now, you can be depressed as an INFJ. I would consider myself having depression in a sense, but the thing is, it's not normal depression. This is super hard to explain, and I don't think I'm gonna get into it too much, but I'm just gonna let you know, uh, if you're super depressed and you're having these depressive feelings and you're typing yourself that way, and it's turning out you're an INFJ, I'm gonna tell sorry, you're probably not an INFJ. Um, you're probably just kind of latching onto it because instead of facing your problems and why you're actually depressed and why you feel the way you do, you're trying to justify it. So a lot of people on the Reddit and the forums use INFJ and the fact that we're rare and misunderstood, which is not really the case. Like I think I'm misunderstood, but it doesn't really bother me that I'm misunderstood. So the INFJs that complain that they feel misunderstood all the time, that's kind of a narcissistic trait. So in my opinion, they're not actually INFJs. Just any INFJ that tells me this, that they're depressed because they feel misunderstood by people around them, I really think it's more of a narcissistic tendency that you have, and you're probably a different type. And then because you're narcissistic, you're then using your INFJ labeling and the fact that you're misunderstood and rare, which is a stereotype of our type. You're using that to justify your depression. Uh, this is a really sensitive topic. I don't like talking about it. I just kind of avoid it, but I'm gonna talk about it right here because I've been drinking. That's the only reason why. So our INFJ is positive. No, I would think we exist in a pretty gray area. Uh, like I said, inverted intuition doesn't naturally come to pretty positive conclusions on things. It's usually pretty negative, or kind of neutral. Uh, it's through processing these ideas through our extroverted feeling, extroverted sensing, and the environment and socializing people that we kind of start to fix those things, take positive outlooks on things. INFJs, I would like to say INFJs like happiness is almost directly correlated with these two, your auxiliary and your inferior function, more than these two. I think these two lead to depression. They will lead you to a lot of dark places, and lead you to things about yourself and about people that you really might off put you. And that doesn't mean they're necessarily not true. The truth of the world is the world's pretty ugly. It's just how it is. People in the world around us is ugly, but this is why we have these functions to balance out our lives. Uh, it's almost ironic that we're the type that can dive the deepest into you know these kind of things, but at the same time, what makes us really happy is just kind of not even thinking about that stuff and just having a good time with people around us. Um, so, will I say INFJs are more likely to be depressed? I don't know. I don't know if there's a study on it. Somebody would have to do a study on it, but then that study will always be flawed because there's less INFJs, so the statistic is always going to be higher anyway. And just because 60% of INFJs are depressed doesn't mean it's more likely in INFJs, because that's 60% of the INFJs on the planet is a fraction of a percent of the amount of sensory types on the planet. And it's just one of those weird things. It's impossible to really read, but it is full of negativity. And I also think it's mostly because the responses you will get on these forums and on these Reddits by actual INFJs will be really warm and friendly, and they'll generally give you some pretty good advice. And I think that's why people kind of gravitate to these areas, especially depressed people. Um, Generally, when you're depressed, you're always kind of looking for some kind of excuse to rationalize your depression, other than looking at your own personal issues. This is speaking from somebody who's suffered through depression for years at a time, without getting any professional help. I always kind of used excuses of why I'm depressed, or blame somebody else, or use some kind of weird irrational logic to avoid looking at my own problems. Generally, if you want to get out of depression, you need to seek help from people. That is the best way, I tell you. Uh, it doesn't matter if you're an INFJ or not, just doing these things with other people and talking to people and communicating with people and getting these feelings out or what's going to fix that. Um, so I will say, if you suffer from depression and you feel misunderstood, I mean, I'm going to be honest, I don't think that has anything to do with being an INFJ. I think if you're an INFJ, anything I've said in the video other than this point that makes sense to you, uh, will pretty much tell you whether or not you're an INFJ. The biggest thing I can tell you, if you're an INFP struggling to figure out if you're an INFJ or not, if you feel like you have a lot of core values that are super important to you, like family, religion, I don't know, like in terms of my brother, dude, he loves pot. Okay, that's his thing. He loves weed. He thinks it's like freeing for him, super valuable to him. He loves everything involving that and stuff like that. It's just like it doesn't have to be something simple. It could be something really weird and awkward too. But if you have things like that, and there's something that like you feel really strongly about, 9 times out of 10, you're probably an INFP and not an INFJ. Uh, and the way you'll be able to tell that is to kind of isolate yourself for a while. And if you isolate yourself for a while, and then like you can actually come up with all these things, you're probably an INFP. INFJs are gonna pull all these things from other people and other sources. For me, it's like if I'm not socializing with people. So for me personally, I go through periods of time where I watch anime and shows in a lot of like media content, but I don't do it all the time. So people generally assume like, oh, all you do is watch anime and shit. It's like because you watch so many. No, it's actually even more unhealthy than that. What ends up happening is I will just go through random periods of time where I need to recharge from all of this, and I'll go into this. But in order to not fall into like a really negative loop, I'll still do this, but I'll do this through media. Okay, so I'll consume uh, unhealthy amounts of anime, of TV shows, uh, to balance out like my extroverted feeling and extroverted sensing uh, into this. I won't do it with people. I'll do it through this. I'll do it through media basically, and I'll do it. I'll binge watch. I don't know how many shows am I at. I'm watching Recovery MMO Junkie right now. Uh, I think I finished I rewatched the entire thing of the Gray Man, including the new season. That's how many episodes is that? It's like 130 episodes. I rewatched Galactic Heroes. That's 100 plus episodes. I did all this in just in a couple days, by the way. Yeah, it's pretty gross. But then I'll go 2 or 3 weeks without touching a single show. Like I won't be interested whatsoever in watching any kind of shows. I'll just be like, I don't have the time. I don't really care. I'll go back into social life and do normal things. So it's just one of those weird things. So yeah, and that's how I'll charge these up while I'm into this loop. So yeah, that's pretty much it. This is pretty much a video on everything INFJ from an INFJ's perspective. I don't have anything else to really talk about other than like maybe like mannerisms. Uh, I find myself using a lot of hand language when I talk if I'm trying to like convince points and things. Mostly because I feel like if you're going to try to convince people of things, you need to show that you're actually uh, passionate about it. I don't like people who talk about things without any sort of passion, which could be argued that I do because of the way I talk, which is funny. But uh, it's almost hypocritical of me, I guess, when I accuse people of not being passionate about what they say. Um, so yeah. Anyway, those are most of the stereotypes. I can't really think of anything else to talk about. This video's already been extremely long. I doubt anybody's gonna watch it, but if you did watch it and you're trying to figure out if you're an INFJ or not, or you want to understand INFJs, hopefully this helps you a little bit more. Um, Hopefully this helps any other INFJs that maybe are struggling and trying to figure things out. Um, I can't think of any more stereotypes, to be honest. I could like look some up. We can go over them. INFJ stereotypes. Here's some more. Warm and affection. We went through this. Perfect relationship. I think to definitely have the separate one instead of constantly searching for I guess opponent when the reasons I have easily. Yeah, this is something like we talked about already, but just watch out for it. There's no such thing as perfect. As an INFJ, you should know this. Uh, you'll search for it anyway because you're just stubborn and that's just how we are. But just understand it's the imperfection. Eventually, I think you'll come to a point where you'll realize that the imperfections in people are what make people great, and it's the imperfections in yourself. You need to start to appreciate them. Like I'm not perfect. I have a lot of imperfections. There are some things that I just can't accept, like my own body and just like the way like I fluctuate in weight all the time, and I go from like skinny to stocky to heavy to back and forth, and I can't have no control over it no matter what I diet and stuff. That kind of pisses me off and drives me insane. But in terms of things involving your personality and just like little things, try to find little things like I have really nice eyes. People compliment my eyes, so I take uh pleasure in that. I appreciate the things I have, and I also appreciate the little flaws I have. So just try to do your best to do that, and try to appreciate the flaws in other people too. Love somebody for their flaws, not for their perfections. I guess that's the best word of advice I can give you. If you really like somebody, you'll find somebody that has a lot of imperfections, but you like those things. Okay, they're what attract you to them. Uh, maybe they're like a little, maybe some people who like tsunderes usually like people who are like that. They like that kind of imperfect like person that can't admit their own feelings, but they know you have a lot of strong feelings about things, and that imperfection of how you express yourself. Some people find that cute. Okay, so that's kind of something to think about. Sensitive to other feelings. Yes, we're really sensitive. We like I said, empathy is in different in every person, but I think in general most INFJs, we very much will soak up kind of like how you're feeling about a thing even without having experienced it ourselves. And this happens to me a lot randomly too. I can't deny it. Like if I watch a show, I'm sure while I'm watching a recovery MMO junkie, there's gonna be random moments where I just like start crying and I don't even know why. So uh which is kind of funny. But this kind of stuff only happens when we're alone, okay? Let me just rephrase, like, make this understood. Is these things, you won't really be able to tell it's happening to us, but it's happening, okay? We're very private about it, in my opinion, in my experience. If like you're making me feel really sad because your story's really sad, I'm not gonna like sit there and start crying with you. I'll probably on my own. I'll probably like reconcile. I'll bring up the event in my mind, and I'll probably get upset about it. But yeah. Uh, yeah. So good communication skills. I would say we do, but we don't. When it comes to really basic, superficial shit, we're really good at it just because of our FE. But when it comes to conveying our own ideas, because of this, right here, we have a really hard time uh, logically and just in general explaining what comes out of here. It's bad. Um, we can do it really well in written form, not so much in verbal. Take commitments very seriously. We definitely do. This has to do with extroverted feeling. People who put we personally, this is just me personally. I don't know if this applies to other INFJs. I hate when people put expectations on me, because when somebody puts an expectation on me and counts on me for something, this is why I like to avoid having any kind of commitments. Uh, to be honest with you, lately, and why I kind of like to just avoid people. Uh, it's like deep down, while I want to be useful to people and for people to be able to count on me, at the same time, it's such a fucking burden and so annoying. Uh, Only because they set these expectations on me. So because of this fucking thing right here, I will literally I will do everything I can to live up to their expectations, and if I don't, it crushes me horribly. If somebody sets expectations for me and kind of like expects me to get things done, it's almost like the best way to take advantage of an INFJ. Okay, so INFJs are very manipulative, but if you're somebody who knows an INFJ and you want to take advantage of them, just set really fucked up expectations on them. Like look them deep in the eye and be like, in a workplace, I don't know, like my boss. I think my boss was pretty intelligent. To be honest, she doesn't. You wouldn't say that just knowing her, but like I always kind of respected her. She very much knew how to take advantage of me, which drove me fucking insane. Because she would just know that if she put expectations on Chris and knew Chris was going to get this done and she didn't have to worry about it, I would then go, and I would do it and I would get it done. And if I didn't get it done, I would. She knows that I would take it very seriously. Okay, that's all. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Is I'm trying to say exactly this. If she puts an expectation on me to get something done and to get it done properly, I take it super seriously because of this. Because I care about what other people think about me. My direct values come from other people's observations and feelings about me. So I wouldn't like to let people down, and I would set super high expectations on myself then. And then when I didn't meet those expectations, because you can't always meet those expectations, it would fucking internally destroy me. I hated it. It's actually what made me take a break from people for a while. Yeah, right here. He even says it. Yes, right here. So we talked about it before, how you kind of get stuck in relationships, but the thing is INFJs are also very good at just kind of straight out cutting off. Despite how long me and my best friend knew each other and how close we were, uh, like to the point where we just knew a lot of dark secrets about each other. Even up to that point, when we finally just stopped talking and just cut our friendship off, which is obviously I've already told the story. It's my own thing. I did it purposely. But once it happened, like it's just like it's done. It's done after all those years. Uh, it's I still think about it once in a while, but honestly, if I cared enough to really reestablish it, I would just drive to her house like 2 minutes down the road and knock on her door and start it over again. But like even in relationships that like drastically hurt me, friendships that ended that really hurt, I spent a lot of time trying to fix them. It's kind of what INFJs will do, is they'll spend a lot of time giving you the benefit of the doubt and just trying to work with you through it. But then eventually it'll just get to the point where it's like, you know what, okay, see you later, dude. And we literally will cut you off from everything. And it's like you said, it's a defense mechanism. I will just completely remove you from my life, and your existence will literally be gone. Like you don't exist anymore. Uh, I will remove pictures of you. I will remove you from Facebook. I will block you. I will remove your phone number. Any kind of conversation logs we had, I will delete. I won't. I literally just won't. You won't exist anymore in my mind. That's how it works. We're really good at that. So if you push us to that point, you're gone, and you probably won't come back. Just so you know. Uh, do I ever want to reestablish a relationship with my former best friend? Obviously, I do, but at the same time, I don't realistically expect it to ever happen just because she's also an INFJ, and I also pretty badly hurt her feelings, so I don't think she's ever going to reach out on her own. It would be something I would have to do or somebody would have to do for us, which I don't see that ever happening. Tend to hold back, keep secrets. Uh, Not so much. I'm a very private person. You and my closest can't get me to talk. However, if I feel like I have a secret, I have to tell someone usually want to be trusted enough. Yeah, this is the thing. This is going to go into another conversation about people considering talking about how INFJs are super upfront and honest and truthful people. This is not the case whatsoever. This is not something that's even possible with extroverted feeling. In my opinion, I think the whole point of extroverted feeling is to actually lie, like tell very polite, friendly lies to maintain social relationships. I don't think this is even possible. I think uh, introverted feeling is what intrinsically will make somebody who doesn't tell a lie and is very truthful and honest. I think this is the opposite. This is very much about putting on mask and meeting other people's needs. Obviously, I think where this comes in and why the stereotype happened is because most types probably have some kind of intrinsic value and importance on telling the truth. Not not like pure truth, but at least like, the truth in a somewhat level of honesty. So please understand that it's not talking about like being completely dishonest. I'm talking about being like super truthful about things, like telling people things they don't want to hear. For the most part, INFJs will not tell you things you need to hear. This is like something that comes either later on as their own value they develop, or it's something through somebody else. So if your close circle of friends are value like pure honesty between each other, 9 times out of 10 the INFJ will then be pretty purely honest because they'll feel comfortable about that. The people I feel least comfortable around are the people who very much can't take credit. It's actually funny. It's like INTPs and INFPs, to be honest. I feel very uncomfortable around them as people, uh, just because they don't take right here. Yeah, right here, pretty much. Stream just like a conflict and criticism. Uh, this applies more to those types than I think it does to INFJ. Uh, I like it, those types. They you and poke their values, prod their values whatsoever. They get very emotional and very conflicted with you about it. And those types are really hard for me to skirt around. Uh, I feel like when I'm around those types, I have to lie a lot and kind of put on a fake face, and it's really annoying. Uh, so generally, I think why this stereotype is true, that INFJs are always pretty honest and truthful, is mostly because the people we usually associate with, that's usually an intrinsic value for them. So then it becomes a value for us. Um, for me personally, just because I've dealt with people like that, it's kind of slowly become a value for me. That's why usually I'm pretty bluntly honest with people. It's also a large influence around one of my closest friends. Uh, she's a very analytical, straightforward person, and I'm pretty comfortable around her, mostly because I know I don't have to like tiptoe around her feelings, because she, even if she gets hurt for like 10 seconds and then gets over it, and then we move on. So it's a lot more comfortable of a relationship, and I think just becoming involved with her and like people like her, because I have other friends that are like that too, I've just slowly adopted like blunt honesty and being able to share my opinions a lot easier. uh I think he says, if you're a stranger, I have no problem being mean or saying how I feel about something. However, if you're my friend, coworker, boss, and I have an extreme difficult time saying anything would start conflict. I hate criticism. I cannot handle it. Uh, criticism. Yeah, I would say I have a hard time taking criticism, especially if it's, I don't know, it's weird. I'm pretty open to suggestions and I like criticism, but I have, I don't know. I think it has to do with your introverted intuition, because you come to these one-sided, one-tracked conclusions on things. Like you take the spider web and then you smush the spider web into one string, kind of thing. I think because you do that, when and it's the opposite of extrovert intuition that pulls in, never meets its conclusion, that's always open to observe different perspectives on things. I think because this is such a polar opposite to that, that when criticism comes in, even if it's positive and constructive and it's right, you just kind of naturally negatively take it and kind of will always kind of start throwing out this, even though we're not good at it, to try to defend it. It's kind of a negative thing, and it's something, as an INFJ, you have to work on. So this is actually kind of like a point of growth for an INFJ. You have to work on this throughout your life, especially if you're going to be into a business sense, any kind of entrepreneurship, or you're going to be a boss or anything like that. You have to really work on this. I think I've gotten better at it because I've had like traditional schooling on it, uh, for like management schooling and stuff like that through work, becoming a manager and doing stuff like that. They've done training to learn how to deal with that properly. And dislike of conflict, it's that's also a weird stereotype, right? Because I can't say I don't dislike conflict in the terms of like you know competing, like competitive conflict, uh especially if I see a point in it. If I don't see a point in it, it's more of like, if I don't see a point in the conflict and I hate it, if it's just pointless conflict for the sake of violence and conflict and arguing, I can't stand it. But if there's actually like a hidden meaning and an agenda behind it, I'm fine with it. and I don't know if that's the case for most INFJs. I think it would be, to be honest. Uh, so yeah, I think like I said, as long as there's a meaning behind it and a purpose in the conflict, I don't have a problem with it. Um, Creative, yeah, we talked about this. Yes, this is something we need to work on. Try to live in this. It's okay to think about the future, but try to enjoy the here and now. Um, I think it is. Just letting people feel, yeah, and this is a stereotype that's true. So some of the stereotypes are true, and some of them aren't. The deep complexity, I don't think this is true at all. I think while we're complex, we're pretty simplistic in our actual needs and desires. So, oh, this is done by a girl, right? I have no idea. I'm assuming this was done by a female. So sorry, I said he. So that's pretty much it. I think I've covered everything. I don't know what else I could cover. Like even mannerisms and stuff. You can't really. You can use those to an extent, but everybody's a little different. Me personally, I think I'm a more goofy, sarcastic INFJ. I can be serious. I think it's a lot about, like I said, everything evolves around your environment and who you're around. Okay, and your circle of friends or acquaintances in this case for INFJs, because you probably don't have a whole lot of friends, which is not a bad thing, by the way. Don't ever assume it's a bad thing. Uh, uh, I have a group that I am more the serious straight man in, and the more concrete, rationalized, analytical mind in that group. But I also have groups that I am the clown, I'm the jokester. I basically INFJs, in my personal opinion, assume the role that is most necessary for whatever group or organization they become a part of. So if the organization is missing that level-headed, structured thinker, I will do my best to become that. Isn't necessarily my strong point, probably not, but I will try to do it anyway. If I feel like I need to be the bad guy in the group, I will become that bad guy. So one thing to keep in mind is that INFJs are very capable of becoming extremely uh, despotic and tyrants. All the biggest tyrants and despots and all those kind of people in the world, like Hitler and all that shit, were INFJs. At the same time, some of the greatest philosophical minds, uh, people who pushed society into a more positive direction and things like that, like Gandhi and stuff, for INFJs as well. So we're capable of either role. Uh, so uh, it's all about how you're shaped by your environment and the people you interact with and meet. You can very much teeter on either edge. Um, there's also INFJs are very complicated too, right? Because I'm very capable of evil. I've done evil in the past, what I would consider evil to people. Uh, but I do those things because I see them necessary. I very much see, like when I was talking about conflict, I very much feel sometimes conflict is necessary, sometimes lies are necessary, and I will do those things if I feel like I can benefit the people involved. I've had groups in the past where I've taken the role of the bad guy, the guy who will say things that triggers people, gets them upset. Uh, it's very much, it's almost could be considered like a martyr complex, but at the same time, it's almost more of just this being annoying. I actually find extroverted feeling to be extremely obnoxious, to be honest. It makes me do things I don't really want to do. I always It always leads me to this demonizing my life and doing things and making decisions based on this because I want to make other people happy. And I don't do enough of this to feel what makes me happy and what I value and what's important to me. Because this is weak, I don't know how to do these things properly when I do figure them out. So I end up just naturally catering to other people. There's times I've sacrificed myself for groups, taking the blame for things that I don't need to take the blame for. For the most part, I'll just let that shit happen to me. Um, I've gotten better at not letting it happen, but it's always going to naturally happen. I've always kind of fallen into this. I think it's just because you get so comfortable uh, playing that role that eventually just becomes the natural and an everyday part of your life. I have groups that I've played that role in, and every once in a while, there's always like that one or two people. Hilariously, one of my friends. that I talk to a lot. It's hard to say if we're even friends or not, but for whatever reason, I'm always like extremely comfortable with just sharing some really private things with her, and like bouncing a lot of ideas and things off of her. Uh, she was in a group that we were in together where I was basically like, uh, everybody knew who I was. This was in an MMO we played. Everybody in the server knew who I was, and I was basically the number one villain in that entire game server across thousands of people. Everybody knew who I was. There was forum posts about me all the time and how much of a scumbag I was, how vile I was, and I took that role in our group mostly for unification purposes, because people weren't getting along. So I pretty much became the bad guy in order to help push the group in order to achieve things. And the group ended up becoming the number one guild in the server for a long time, and I think they still are. And I have a lot of archived villainous posts about that myself in that game, so it's pretty funny actually. Uh, I think they still keep my character active, and they just kind of rename it and fuck around with it, and they kind of use it as like almost like a statue now of remember the villain. It's pretty funny, but this girl in particular understood, like she could see, I don't know what type she is. I never bothered. I don't really care, but she could see, she understood what I was doing, and she's somebody that uh, it was really painful for me to actually do those things, but because she understood what I was doing and I could talk to her about it, and she understood what was happening, what I was trying to do, it was easier for me that way. So there's always going to be people who can see and understand uh, the hidden meaning behind your actions. So don't think there won't be. So there's always going to be people out there for you. You're not going to be misunderstood forever. There are people who do understand, and so that's it, man. This video is extremely long. I apologize. I have nothing else. I don't know what else to say, guys. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. If you're an INFJ, you want to talk about things, I guess. Uh, that's everything. That's everything. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Goodbye.